Christmas has always been my favorite time of year. The lights, the snow, the warmth of nostalgia. It's a season of joy, a time when the world feels at peace. But last year, something changed. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about Christmas and about reality itself. It started with my niece, Ellie. She was 6 years old, with bright blue eyes and a curiosity that could rival a detective. Christmas to her was a magical time, filled with Santa Claus, cookies, and endless possibilities. But one night, while we were decorating a tree, she asked a question that would change everything. "Uncle, why doesn't anyone talk about the 10th reindeer?" she asked, her voice tinged with a seriousness that didn't match her age. I laughed, trying to brush it off. "What 10th reindeer?" I replied, hanging a shimmering red ornament on the tree. Ellie frowned, her small hands resting on her hips. "You know, the one before Rudolph." A strange chill crawled up my spine despite the warmth of the room. "There were only 9, I said firmly. "Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen, and Rudolph." Ellie shook her head, her golden curls bouncing. "No, there was another one, the one with the black nose." That was when my sister, Ellie's mother, froze. She had been quietly arranging the cookies on the table, but now she stood still, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at me, her face pale, and mouthed a single word. "I remember that." We searched online that night. Nothing. No record of a 10th reindeer. No mention of a reindeer with a black nose. But Ellie wouldn't stop talking about it. She said she remembered a book from when she was little, one Grandma used to read. A story about the lost reindeer, the one who went away. That night we checked Grandma's attic, and in a dusty old box, we found it. A tattered children's book, yellowed with age. The cover read, "The 10th Reindeer." I stared at it, my heart pounding. I had never seen this book before in my life, but when I opened it, my childhood came rushing back. The story, the rhyme, the reindeer with the black nose, the one who was forgotten. And then I saw the last page. It was a drawing of Santa's sleigh, soaring through the sky. The reindeer lined up in front. There were 10, but the last one, the black-nosed one, wasn't flying. It was falling, and beneath the illustration, written in jagged, almost frantic letters, "He knows when you remember." That was when the scratching started at the window. At first, it was just a faint sound. T-K, T-K, T-Cat, guy. It could have been a branch or a stray animal. But then it stopped, and started again. Louder this time. Ellie's eyes widened as she grabbed my arm. "What is that?" I tried to reassure her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house felt cold despite the heater humming in the background. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. We lit candles, trying to keep the mood light, but the darkness outside seemed to press in on us. Ellie wouldn't stop talking about the book. She said the reindeer had a name, but she couldn't remember it. My sister tried to distract her with Christmas cookies and stories of Santa, but the idea of the forgotten reindeer lingered in the air like a shadow. Days passed, but the scratching returned every night. It was always at the window, always the same rhythm, TK-TK-gat-chat-gat. One night, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside into the snow. The yard was quiet, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath my boots. And then I saw them, hoof prints, leading away from the house, but never arriving. Ellie said she heard something breathing outside her door. At first, we dismissed it as her imagination, but when I checked, I could have sworn I heard it too. A low, heavy breathing. It sent chills down my spine. And then we found the photo. My sister was cleaning out the attic when she stumbled upon an old picture of our childhood Christmas. We were all there, smiling, surrounded by presents. But in the background, a man dressed as Santa was watching us. His face was blurry, almost as if he hadn't been there at all. "I don't remember that Santa," I said, frowning. My sister shook her head. "I don't think we ever had a Santa at that party." That's when things started to spiral. Ellie began having nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night, screaming. She said she saw a reindeer with a black nose, its eyes glowing red. She said it was watching her. And then she remembered the name. "I think it's Belsnickel," she whispered one night, her voice trembling. "No, that's not it. It's something else, something darker." We tried to research it, but every time we mentioned the name, something strange happened. The lights would flicker, the TV would turn on by itself, and the scratching at the window grew louder. One night, we found an old Christmas Carol recording in Grandma's collection. It was a song I had never heard before, the lyrics faint and distorted, but one line stood out. "The reindeer who went missing, the one who fell from the sky." And then a deep, growling voice murmured, "You should not have remembered." That's when the book began to change. The pages would turn on their own, the illustrations shifting. The 10th reindeer was getting closer, its black nose glowing faintly. And then one morning we found a single black hoofprint inside the house. It was as if the reindeer had stepped into our world. We realized then that the 10th reindeer was real, and it had been forgotten for a reason. Santa didn't guide him, he banished him. The reindeer was a creature of darkness, tied to something ancient and evil. Remembering his name was how he found his way back, and now he was coming for us. The night Ellie disappeared, the power went out. The house was pitch black, and the only sound was the scratching at the window, louder than ever before. I ran to her room, but her bed was empty. The window was open, and in the yard I saw a trail of hoofprints leading into the snow. The last thing I saw before the world turned black was a massive, shadowy reindeer standing at the edge of the woods. Its black nose glowed faintly, not with light, but with an absence of it. And then everything was gone. When I came to, I was alone in the house. The book was on the floor, its pages torn. The last page was gone, but the message was clear. He knows when you remember. Now, every Christmas, the scratching starts again. And I wonder if I'll hear it this year. If he'll come back. If Ellie will come back. But most of all, I wonder what happens when you remember something you were never supposed to remember. The question no one asked. Christmas has always been my favorite time of year. The twinkling lights that dance across houses like fireflies on a summer night, the soft crunch of snow under boots, and the warmth of nostalgia that clings to every ornament we hang on the tree. But last year something changed. Something small, something insignificant, shattered the perfect illusion of Christmas magic. It started with my niece, Ellie. She was 6 years old, with sparkling blue eyes and a mind full of wonder. She loved Santa Claus more than ice cream, and that's saying a lot. One chilly December evening, we were decorating the tree together, Ellie carefully placing a glass snowflake on a branch, while I tangled the lights into what I hoped would look like a deliberate pattern. She looked up at me with an expression so serious, it made me laugh. "Uncle," she said, her tiny hands on her hips, "why doesn't anyone talk about the 10th reindeer?" I froze, the string of lights slipping from my fingers. "What 10th reindeer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Ellie frowned, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You know, the one before Rudolph." A strange chill crawled up my spine, icy and sharp. I didn't like it. "There were only 9, kiddo," I said, forcing a smile. "Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen, and Rudolph." I rattled them off like a prayer, hoping to reassure her, and myself. But Ellie shook her head, her blonde pigtails swishing with emotion. "No," she insisted. "There was another one, the one with the black nose." That was when my sister, Ellie's mother, froze. She had been humming along to Bing Crosby's White Christmas while wrapping gifts on the couch, but now she stared at me, her face pale. Her hands were trembling and the wrapping paper slipped to the floor. "I remember that," she whispered. I felt my heart skip a beat. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My sister swallowed hard. "The 10th reindeer, I think I remember it too." We spent the rest of the evening scouring the internet for answers, searching for any mention of a 10th reindeer. But there was nothing. No articles, no books, no mention of a mysterious black-nosed reindeer. It was as if it never existed. But Ellie wouldn't let it go. She kept talking about it, her voice filled with a conviction that unsettled me. I read about it in Grandma's old Christmas book, she said, her eyes wide with certainty. The one with the black nose. He was the lost one, the one who went away. My sister and I exchanged a glance. Grandma had passed away 2 years ago, and her attic was still filled with boxes of her things, old trinkets, clothes, and books. Maybe Ellie was right. Maybe there was a book we had forgotten about. That night, we decided to check Grandma's attic. The attic was a dusty, cobweb-filled space that smelled of old paper and forgotten memories. The air was thick and heavy, and the single bulb that lit the room flickered like it might go out at any moment. Ellie climbed the creaky ladder first, her determination unwavering. My sister followed, and I brought up the rear, my heart pounding in my chest. We spent hours digging through boxes, pulling out old photo albums, vintage ornaments, and stacks of yellowed letters tied with ribbon. But there was no sign of a Christmas book until Ellie let out a gasp. "There!" she cried, pointing to a dusty box tucked into the corner of the attic. It was old and worn, the lid slightly ajar. My sister opened it, and inside, buried beneath layers of tissue paper, was a tattered children's book. The cover was faded, but the title was still legible, The 10th Reindeer. I stared at it, my heart racing. I had never seen this book before in my life. When I opened it, something strange happened. The pages were thin, almost translucent, and the illustrations seemed... The colors were dull, the lines jagged and uneven. It didn't feel right. And yet, as I flipped through the pages, a flood of memories hit me like a tidal wave. The story, the rhyme, the reindeer with the black nose, the one who was forgotten. I turned to the last page, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a drawing of Santa's sleigh soaring through a starry night sky. The reindeer were lined up in front, their antlers reaching toward the moon. But there were 10 of them. The 9th was Rudolph, his red nose glowing brightly. The 10th was the black-nosed reindeer, and he wasn't flying, he was falling. Beneath the illustration, scrawled in jagged, almost frantic letters, was a single sentence. "He knows when you remember." That was when the scratching started. At first it was faint, scratch, 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 against the window. It sounded like a branch swaying in the wind, but there were no trees near the attic window. Ellie clutched my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, but as we left the attic, the scratching grew louder. It wasn't just at the window anymore. It was everywhere. Scratch, I, scratch, tail, scratch. And it was coming from inside the house. The forgotten storybook. The attic was a place of forgotten memories, a dusty tomb where time seemed to stand still. My sister, Rachel, and I hadn't been up there in years, not since we were kids. But Ellie's insistence about the 10th reindeer stirred something in us, a faint recollection that neither of us could quite place. So, on that cold, snowy afternoon, we decided to dig through the past. Ellie, with her wide-eyed curiosity, led the way, her small frame climbing the creaky ladder as if driven by a mission. Rachel followed, her expression a mix of reluctance and unease. I brought up the rear, my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped into the dimly lit space. The air smelled of old paper and decay, and the faint hum of the house settling seemed to echo with a sinister undertone. "Grandma's old trunks are over there," Rachel said, pointing to a corner where 3 large, rusted trunks sat, their lids slightly ajar. Cobwebs clung to them like veils, and the dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the grimy attic window. Ellie ran to the trunks, her enthusiasm undeterred by the eerie atmosphere. She lifted the lid of the first trunk, revealing a pile of yellowed clothes and a stack of old photographs. Rachel and I exchanged a look, both of us remembering the countless hours we'd spent as kids poring over those photos. But it was the second trunk that caught my attention. It was smaller, locked with an old rusted key. Rachel raised an eyebrow as I tugged on the lid. "Think it's locked for a reason," she said, her voice low and cautious. "Ellie said Grandma used to read her a book," I countered, my fingers fumbling with the lock. It gave way with a faint click, and the lid creaked open. Inside, beneath a layer of tissue paper, lay a single, tattered book. The cover was a faded green, embossed with gold letters, The 10th Reindeer. I froze. Something about the title felt wrong. Rachel leaned in closer, her breath visible in the cold air. "I don't remember this," she said softly. Ellie, however, gasped as if she'd found something miraculous. "That's it!" she exclaimed, her hands trembling as she reached for the book. As she opened it, a faint whisper of pages turning filled the air, though none of us had moved. The pages were thin, almost translucent, and the illustrations depicted Santa's sleigh and the reindeer in a style that felt old, older than anything I'd seen before. But it was the last page that made my blood run cold. There, in a crude drawing, was Santa's sleigh soaring through a starry sky, the reindeer lined up in front. 9 of them were flying, their antlers proud and their eyes gleaming. The 10th, however, was falling. Its body was twisted, its legs splayed, and its nose, black as coal, pointed toward the ground. Beneath the drawing, in jagged, almost frantic handwriting, was a single sentence. "He knows when you remember." Ellie's voice broke the silence. "He's sad," she said, her finger tracing the falling reindeer. "He doesn't want to fall." Rachel's hand found mine, her grip tight. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered. As if in response, the attic seemed to shift around us. The air grew colder, and the shadows cast by the fading light stretched and twisted on the walls. I could swear I heard a faint scratching sound like fingernails on wood, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. "Let's go downstairs," Rachel urged, pulling me toward the ladder. But I hesitated. The book felt strange in my hands, its pages too thin, too light, as if something had been erased from them. The illustrations seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, and the words on the last page seemed to crawl under my skin. "He knows when you remember," I muttered, my voice barely audible. Ellie frowned. "What's wrong, Uncle?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "Nothing. Let's just go." As we descended into the warmth of the house, the scratching sound followed us, faint but persistent. It wasn't until we reached the living room that it stopped. That night I couldn't sleep. The book lay on my bedside table, its cover seeming to glint in the moonlight. Every creak of the house made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to remember. And then, just as I drifted off, I heard it again, the scratching. This time, it was right outside my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound. The window was frosty, but I could make out a shape on the other side. Hoofprints, perhaps, but they were too large, too jagged, and they seemed to pulse with a strange black light. The scratching stopped, and then a voice came. A low, deep murmur that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It wasn't speaking English, but I could feel the words in my bones. "Remember." I didn't scream. I couldn't. All I could do was lie there, staring at the window, as the voice faded into the night, leaving behind only the faintest whisper. "He's coming." The name that disappeared. The days that followed were filled with an eerie silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Ellie's obsession with the 10th reindeer only grew stronger, and her insistence that it had a name began to unsettle everyone in the family. My sister, Sarah, tried to brush it off as a child's imagination, but the way she avoided eye contact told me she was hiding something. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all standing on the edge of something we didn't fully understand. Ellie spent hours poring over the tattered children's book we'd found in Grandma's attic, her small fingers tracing the faded illustrations as if trying to bring them back to life. The pages were thin, almost translucent, and the text had a strange, almost erased quality to it, as if someone had tried to scrub out certain words. But Ellie was determined. She was convinced the reindeer had a name and she was going to find it. I tried to help, scrolling through my phone for any mention of a 10th reindeer in old Christmas records. What I found was strange. There were whispers in obscure forums and antique books about versions of the classic poem that included more than 9 reindeer. Some even mentioned 12. But whenever I clicked on the links, they led to dead pages or error messages. It was as if someone or something was erasing the information. One night, as the house creaked and groaned around us, I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop glowing in the dim light. Sarah sat across from me, her arms crossed tightly as if trying to hold herself together. "This is getting out of hand," she said, her voice low but tight with worry. "Ellie's obsession is starting to scare me." I nodded, glancing toward the stairs where Ellie's bedroom was. We could hear her muttering to herself, her small voice rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern. "She's just a kid," I said, but the words felt hollow. "She'll grow out of it." But Sarah wasn't convinced. "You didn't hear her today," she said. She was talking about the reindeer like it was real, like it was watching her. I frowned. Watching her. Sarah's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of fear there. She said it was waiting, that it knew we were remembering. The word sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, a faint scratching sound echoed from outside. It was light at first, like fingernails on glass, but it grew louder, more insistent. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah's breath hitched, and she grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. Slowly, I stood up and walked to the window. The night was dark, the only light coming from the moon casting long shadows across the yard. I pressed my face against the cold glass, straining to see anything out of the ordinary. The scratching stopped. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the sound itself. "Probably just a raccoon," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice trembled. Sarah didn't believe me. Neither did I. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump, and I found myself staring at the shadows on my wall, wondering if they were moving. It wasn't until I heard my own voice whisper, "What's going on?" that I realized I wasn't alone in my thoughts. It was as if something was echoing my fears, amplifying them. I threw off the covers and went downstairs, hoping to clear my head. The house was quiet except for the occasional pop of the old heater. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop still open from earlier. On a whim, I started searching for more information about the 10th reindeer, scrolling through forum posts and antique book scans. That's when I stumbled on it, a single line in an old handwritten journal. They called him Oblivion, it read. The reindeer who was forgotten, the one who was banished. I froze. The name sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment I could swear I heard a low, guttural growl coming from outside. It was a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. My heart raced as I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. I didn't want to know more. I didn't want to remember, but it was too late. The name was in my head now, echoing like a curse. Oblivion. The forgotten reindeer. The one who is banished. And then the whispers started. At first they were faint, a soft susurration that seemed to come from all directions at once. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just the wind or my imagination. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were words, but I couldn't quite make them out. It was like someone was trying to tell me something, but their voice was muffled, distorted. I sat there, paralyzed as the whispers grew clearer. Remember, remember. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. The whispers stopped. The silence was oppressive, heavy, and I could feel eyes on me, watching me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, waiting. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything was normal again. The lights came back on, the house was quiet, and the whispers were gone. But I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Whatever was out there, whatever was watching, it had just made its presence known. And it was getting closer. Scratch at the window. The night was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old house settling into the cold. I lay in bed, the warmth of the blanket a stark contrast to the chill outside. But then a sound broke the stillness, a low, rasp-like scratch against my window. It wasn't the usual patter of snow or the rustle of wind. It was something deliberate, something alive. My heart quickened as I threw off the covers, the floorboards beneath my feet cold and unforgiving. I approached the window, pulling back the curtain to reveal a yard blanketed in snow, illuminated only by the faint moonlight. That's when I saw them, hoofprints, large and deep, leading away from the house but stopping abruptly, as if something had vanished into thin air. A shiver ran down my spine. No animal I knew left prints like that. I turned to go back to bed, but a knock on the door stopped me. It was my sister, her face pale. "Ellie heard something," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ellie was in her room, her eyes wide with fear. "It was breathing outside my door," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tried to reassure her, but the fear was palpable, hanging in the air like a thick fog. We gathered in the living room, the fire crackling softly. My sister mentioned an old family secret, a curse tied to Christmas, but before she could elaborate, a low thud echoed outside. I rose to check, and that's when I saw it, a shadowy figure darting around the corner of the house. Returning inside, I found Ellie clutching her favorite toy, a small dog named Max, who was whining nervously. "We need to talk," my sister said, her voice low. She spoke of our ancestors and a curse, of a reindeer bound by dark magic, its existence erased from memory but not from reality. As she spoke, the fire dimmed and a cold breeze swept through the room. Max barked, his eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned to see hoofprints on the floor, leading to the window. And then I saw it, a face, shadowy and distorted, pressed against the glass. The world around me froze. The face was gone as quickly as it appeared, but the impact lingered. I felt watched, the weight of unseen eyes upon me. The scratching started again, this time more insistent, more urgent. I stepped back, my mind racing. The 10th reindeer, the curse, the erased history, it all swirled together in a vortex of fear and confusion. I glanced at Ellie, her eyes wide with terror, and knew we had to uncover the truth before it was too late. But as I turned to leave, I saw it again, the shadowy figure, closer now, its presence filling the room with an eerie cold. And then everything went black. The horror wasn't just in the scratches or the hoofprints. It was in the realization that some secrets were meant to stay buried, and remembering them could be the most dangerous thing of all. The old man in the red coat. The attic was always a place of nostalgia, a dusty tomb of forgotten memories. My sister, Rachel, had been digging through old trunks and boxes for hours, her fingers stained with grime. The faint scent of pine and decay lingered in the air, a reminder of Christmases long past. Ellie, now 9 years old, sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes wide with excitement as she sorted through old ornaments and photographs. "Look at this," Rachel exclaimed, her voice muffled behind a stack of yellowed letters. She emerged with a photograph, its edges curled and faded. "Remember this?" I took the photo, squinting as the dim attic light struggled to illuminate the image. It was an old Polaroid, the kind our parents used to take back in the 90s. In the picture, Rachel and I were sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by shredded wrapping paper and half-eaten cookies. A Christmas tree twinkled in the background, its lights reflecting off the camera lens. "Who's that?" Ellie asked, leaning closer. I froze. In the corner of the photo, barely visible behind the tree, stood a man in a red suit. His face was blurred, as if he'd moved just as the photo was taken. But it was the way he was standing, slightly hunched, his hands behind his back, that sent a shiver down my spine. "That's Santa," Rachel said hesitantly. "But I don't remember Santa coming to our house that year." I shook my head. "He didn't. Mom and Dad couldn't afford it. We never had a Santa visit." Ellie frowned. "So, who is it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I studied the photo again. The man in red seemed odd. His suit was too dark, the color almost black in the faded image. His hands, partially obscured, looked too large, too claw-like. And his face, what little I could see of it, didn't seem jolly or kind. It was gaunt, shadowed with sunken eyes that seemed to bore into the camera. "Let me see that," I said, my voice low. I turned the photo over, hoping for a date or a name on the back. There was nothing, just the faint impression of a fingerprint smudged across the surface. Rachel crossed her arms. "This is weird. Mom would have told us if we had a Santa visit." Ellie leaned back, her eyes wide with excitement. "Maybe it wasn't Santa. Maybe it was someone else." Someone else. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. That night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Rachel and I sat at the kitchen table, the photo between us. The house was quiet, the only sound the creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath our feet. "Do you think this has something to do with the 10th reindeer?" Rachel whispered. She'd always been the more skeptical one, the one who didn't believe in ghosts or curses. But now, she sounded unsure. I hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe it's just an old photo. Maybe Mom and Dad forgot to tell us about it." But deep down, I didn't believe that. There was something unsettling about the man in red. Something that didn't feel right. His presence in the photo felt like a lie, a careful insertion into a memory that wasn't ours. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, replaying the image of the man in red. His blurred face haunted me, as if he were trying to step into focus but couldn't quite make it. I tossed and turned, the silence of the house broken only by the occasional crack of the radiator. Then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper. It wasn't a word, just a sound like something scraping against glass. I sat up, my heart pounding. The whisper came again, this time followed by a faint, scratching noise. It sounded like nails on wood. I threw off the covers and padded to the window. The yard below was blanketed in snow, the moon casting long shadows across the ground. And then I saw it, a dark shape, hulking and shadowy, standing just beyond the tree line. Its presence was massive, imposing, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The scratching sound came again, this time from the window itself. I froze, my breath fogging the glass. There, etched into the frost, was a single word: remember. The next morning I found Rachel in the living room, the old photo clutched in her hand. She looked pale, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "I saw him," she said quietly. "The man in red. He was standing outside my window last night. I didn't need to ask who she meant. We need to talk to Ellie," I said. "She's the only one who remembers the 10th reindeer. Maybe she knows what's going on." But when we checked Ellie's room, she was gone. Her bed was made, her window open, and on the sill was a single black hoofprint, glistening in the morning light. And beneath it, written in the frost, was a name, Malum. As the days passed, the scratching sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just at the windows anymore. It echoed through the walls, a constant reminder that something was watching, waiting. And then one night, the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. When they came back on, Ellie was sitting at the kitchen table, the old book of the 10th reindeer open in front of her. She looked up at us, her eyes wide with fear. "I remember," she said. "The reindeer's name was Malum, and he's coming for us." As she spoke, the air seemed to thicken, the shadows in the room twisting and writhing like living things. And in the distance I could hear the sound of hooves, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the snow. They were getting closer. The 10th reindeer was coming, and he wasn't bringing gifts. The name they were never supposed to say. It started with a sound, an unfamiliar sound, one that pierced through the quiet night like a knife through silk. The house was still, wrapped in the heavy blanket of winter. The trees outside were bare, their branches creaking softly in the wind. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace had long faded, leaving only a faint trace of smoke in the air. Ellie wasn't sleeping. I could hear her stirring in her room, the soft rustle of her sheets as she tossed and turned. My sister, her mother, had tried everything to calm her down. Warm milk, stories, even the soft hum of Christmas carols. But Ellie's mind was a storm, her thoughts racing with the memory of the 10th reindeer. She had always been a sensitive child, prone to vivid dreams and an imagination that could run wild. But this was different. There was something in her voice, something that made the air in the room feel heavy, like a shadow pressing against the walls. And then she screamed. It was a sound that froze time. My sister and I rushed to her room, our hearts pounding like drums in a frantic rhythm. The door creaked open, and there she was, sitting up in bed, her small frame shaking like a leaf. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. "Ellie, what's wrong?" my sister asked. her voice trembling as she knelt beside her daughter. But Ellie didn't answer. Instead, she looked past us, her gaze fixed on something we couldn't see. Her lips moved, forming a word, but no sound came out. And then, in a whisper so soft it was almost a breath, she said it. Malum Tudi? The name hung in the air like a curse. It was a name that felt wrong, a name that didn't belong in this world. It was as if the very sound of it had a weight, a heaviness that pressed down on us all. And then, without warning, the room seemed to shudder. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging us into darkness. In the blackness, there was a sound that was both familiar and yet completely alien. It was the sound of shattering glass, the clatter of metal, and the soft thud of objects hitting the floor. The Christmas decorations, every single one of them, had fallen to the ground. The tree swayed precariously, its branches bare now, the ornaments scattered all over the room. The sound was like a symphony of chaos, a cacophony that filled the air and left us all in stunned silence. But it wasn't just the decorations. The house itself seemed to react. The walls creaked, the floor groaned, and the wind outside seemed to howl in response, as if something had awakened, something that had been asleep for a very long time. And then there was the hoofprint. It wasn't until the next morning when the sun had risen and the house was bathed in its pale light that we saw it. A single hoofprint, deep and perfect, pressed into the snow just outside Ellie's window. It was large, much larger than any deer we had ever seen, and it was black, the edges sharp and defined. But it was what lay beside it that made my blood run cold. A single word, carved into the snow with a precision that was almost human. Remember. The words sent a chill down my spine. It was written in the same jagged, almost frantic letters as the last page of the old book, and it was then, standing there in the cold morning light, that I realized the truth. The 10th reindeer wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was coming for us. But there was more. The hoofprint wasn't the only sign. Inside the house, on the floor beside Ellie's bed, there was a piece of paper. It was old, yellowed with age, and it had been torn from the same book we had found in the attic. The illustration showed the 10th reindeer, its black nose glinting in the moonlight, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. But this time, the reindeer wasn't alone. Standing beside it, cloaked in shadows, was a figure, a man in a red coat, his face obscured, his presence filling the page with an unspeakable evil. And then, the words. Written in the same jagged letters as before. He knows when you remember. But there was something else, something that made my heart pound in my chest. And at the bottom of the page, in handwriting that was different from the rest, was a single sentence. The name is the key. And then there was the name. Malum. It was a name that felt like a curse, a name that had the power to awaken something that had been forgotten for centuries. And now, because of Ellie, because of her memories, it was no longer forgotten. The days that followed were filled with an increasing sense of dread. The house was no longer safe, no longer a place of warmth and comfort. It was as if we were being watched, as if something was waiting for us, just beyond the edge of our vision. And then the nightmares started. Ellie would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, her sheets soaked with sweat. She would see things, dark shapes moving in the shadows, eyes glowing in the dark, and the sound of hooves, heavy and slow, echoing through her mind. And then, the voices. Whispers soft and indistinct, but they were there, always there, in the background. And then, there was the sound at the window. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was a sound that was both familiar and yet completely alien. It was the sound of something trying to get in, something that didn't belong. But every time we looked, there was nothing. Just the trees swaying in the wind and the snow untouched and pristine. But the sound kept coming back. Scratch, scratch, crunch. And with it, the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, grew stronger. And then, there was the figure. It was my sister who saw it first. She was standing in the kitchen looking out the window when she saw it. A man, tall and imposing, dressed in a long red coat, his face hidden in the shadows of a hood. He was standing at the edge of the woods just beyond the reach of the porch light. And then he was gone. But the image stayed with her, haunting her. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. And then she started to see things too. The same dark shapes, the same glowing eyes. And then the whispers. Whispers that were getting louder, clearer. And then the hoofprints appeared inside the house. They were in the hallway leading from Ellie's room to the front door. They were deep, heavy, and they seemed to pulse with a dark, malevolent energy. And then they stopped, right in front of the door. And then the sound came again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. This time, it wasn't at the window. It was at the door. But when we opened it, there was nothing. Just the cold, empty night. And then the voice. Deep, resonant, and filled with an unspeakable evil. It spoke a single word, remember. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head pounding, the room spinning. My sister was beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. And then there was Ellie. She was gone. Her bed was empty, the covers thrown aside, and the window was open, the cold winter air streaming in. And on the floor, leading out into the snow, were the hoofprints. They were the same as before, only this time they were different. This time, they were fresh. And then I saw it. At the edge of the woods, standing tall and imposing, was the shadowy reindeer. Its black nose glowed faintly, like an absence of light. And beside it, in the red coat, was the figure. And then, everything went black again. This time, when I came to, I was alone. The house was silent, the only sound the soft creaking of the old wooden floorboards. And on the table, next to the old book, was a note. It was written in the same jagged letters as before. He knows when you remember. And then there was the hoofprint. It was on the table, pressed into the wood, a reminder of what had happened. And then the voice came again, remember. But I didn't need to remember. I knew. The 10th reindeer, the one with the black nose, had been forgotten for a reason. It wasn't a part of Santa's team. It wasn't a hero. It was something else. Something dark. Something evil. And now, because of Ellie, because of her memories, it was coming back. It was coming for us. And then there was the last thing I saw before the world turned black, the massive, shadowy reindeer standing at the edge of the woods. Its black nose glowed faintly, like an absence of light. And beside it, in the red coat, was the figure. Waiting, watching, remembering. And then, everything was gone. The song had changed. The night was heavy with the scent of pine and cinnamon. The air was thick with the kind of quiet that feels almost physical. My sister, Claire, had been going through Grandma's old trunks, pulling out things she hadn't seen in years. Grandma had been the keeper of Christmas, the one who made every holiday feel magical, even when money was tight. But when she passed, it was like a piece of the magic died with her. Claire had found an old record player in the attic along with a stack of vinyl records. She brought it downstairs, plugging it into the wall with a surge of excitement. "Look at this," she'd said, holding up a record with a crack running down the middle. "It's Grandma's favorite Christmas album." I'd shrugged, not particularly interested, but Ellie had been fascinated. She loved anything old, anything that felt like a story waiting to be uncovered. So Claire carefully placed the needle on the record, and the room filled with the crackling static of old vinyl. The music that followed was familiar at first, Jingle Bells, sung in a smooth baritone voice. But as the song went on, something felt off. The singer's voice seemed to waver, the notes bending in ways that didn't quite sound right. And then when the chorus came, the lyrics were different. "Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen," the singer crooned. "Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen," and the one who went away. Ellie's eyes snapped to mine, wide and unblinking. "See," she whispered. "I told you." I didn't have time to respond. The next line of the song sent a chill running down my spine. 9 reindeer flying, 1 lost in the night. The 10th, the forgotten, the one without light. The music warped then, the notes stretching into something discordant, something that made my teeth ache. The singer's voice dropped to a low, gravelly growl, and the words that came next weren't part of any Christmas song I'd ever heard. He knows when you remember. He knows when you see, the one who was lost, the one who was free. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the music stopped. The needle skipped, scratching against the vinyl with a sharp, unpleasant sound. The room was silent, the only noise the faint hum of the heater in the corner. Where did Grandma get this? Claire breathed, her voice shaky. She looked pale, her hands trembling as she reached for the record. I shook my head. I don't know, but maybe we shouldn't play it again. But Ellie was already moving, her small frame darting toward the record player. Let me hear it again, she said, her voice firm in a way that made me nervous. Ellie, no, I said, but she was already turning the record over, placing the needle at the start. The music began again, but this time it was different from the very first note. The singer's voice was deeper, darker, and the words were no longer a simple Christmas tune. Listen close, listen well. The one who is forgotten will come to tell. The price of remembering, the cost of the past. He will find you, and he will come fast. The record skipped again. The sound was like a guttural laugh. And then, as if something had moved through the room, the air shifted. It felt colder, the shadows on the walls twisting into shapes that didn't make sense. Claire stepped back, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. That's enough, she said, grabbing the record and pulling it off the player. This feels wrong, but I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the record, spinning slowly on the turntable. There was something about it, something that made me feel like I was staring into the face of something ancient and evil. And then, as if to confirm my fear, a voice spoke. You should not have remembered. It wasn't the singer's voice. It wasn't even human. It was low and resonant, like thunder on a summer night, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Ellie screamed, a high-pitched sound that shattered the tension in the room. I turned to grab her, but she was already running, bolting out of the room and up the stairs. Her door slammed shut, and I could hear her crying, the sound muffled but unmistakable. Claire's face was white. What was that? She whispered. I shook my head. I don't know, but I think we need to get rid of that record. Now. But as I turned to take it, I noticed something. The label on the record was different. It had been a plain red label before, but now it was black, and in the center there was a single word etched in silver letters. Remember? I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Claire, look at this. She leaned in, and her gasp was sharp enough to make me jump. That wasn't there before. I didn't need to say anything else. We both knew what we had to do. I grabbed the record, and together we hurried outside, the winter air biting at our faces. We didn't stop until we were at the edge of the woods, the house far behind us. I dropped the record on the ground, and Claire brought a heavy rock down on it. The crack was loud, satisfying, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But as we turned to go back, I heard it. A low, guttural growl, like something moving through the trees. And then a single word, spoken in that same thunderous voice. Soon. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I grabbed Claire's hand, and we ran, the darkness closing in behind us like a living thing. The return of the lost one. The house was quiet, save for the faint crackle of the wind outside. It had been 2 days since we found the book, and since then, strange things had been happening. Ellie would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming about dark shadows in her room. My sister had started acting oddly, too, muttering to herself about the weight of remembering. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the air in the house felt heavy, like something was watching us. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat in the living room, staring at the old book. It was lying on the coffee table, its cover slightly open. I hadn't touched it, but the pages seemed to be rustling on their own. A faint whisper, like the sound of pages turning, filled the room. My heart raced as I approached the table. The book was flipping through its pages by itself. The sound was soft, almost soothing, but it sent chills down my spine. I reached out to stop it, but before I could, the pages finally came to a halt. The illustration on the last page had changed. The 10th reindeer, the one with the black nose, was no longer falling from the sky. Now it was standing on the ground, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The other reindeer were gone, and the sleigh was empty as if abandoned. I slammed the book shut, my hands trembling. But as I did, I heard a sound I couldn't ignore, a faint scratching noise coming from the floor. It was light at first, like a fingernail against wood, but it grew louder, more insistent. I looked down and saw it, a single black hoofprint in the middle of the room. It glistened as if it were wet, and it seemed to pulse with a dark energy. "Ellie," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "Come here now." She ran to the room, her eyes wide with fear. "Uncle, what is it?" I pointed at the hoofprint. "Do you see that?" She nodded, her face pale. "It's him, isn't it? The 10th reindeer." My sister appeared in the doorway, her hands shaking. "We need to do something. We can't just sit here and wait for whatever is happening to happen." I looked at the book on the table. "Maybe we can find a way to stop this. There has to be a way to make it go away." Ellie shook her head. "You can't make him go away. He's been forgotten for too long. He's angry." Her words sent a chill through me. "What do you mean, angry?" "He doesn't like being forgotten," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't like being left behind." As she spoke, the scratching sound returned, louder this time. It wasn't just coming from the floor. It was coming from the walls, the ceiling, everywhere. It sounded like something was clawing its way through the house, trying to get in. I grabbed the book and flipped through its pages. The illustrations were changing now, moving like a living thing. The 10th reindeer was no longer alone. He was standing in a forest, his black nose glowing and his eyes filled with a deep, burning anger. The other reindeer were nowhere to be seen, and Santa's sleigh was broken, lying in pieces on the ground. The last page had changed, too. The words, "He knows when you remember," were now scratched out, replaced with something new. "He comes when you call." I slammed the book shut again, but the scratching continued. It was relentless, echoing through the house like a living thing. I could feel it in my bones, a constant rhythmic scrape that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The house was plunged into darkness, and the scratching stopped. The silence was worse than the noise, heavy and oppressive. I could feel eyes on me, watching me, waiting for me to make a move. "Ellie," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Stay close to me." She nodded, but I couldn't see her. The darkness was absolute, and I was blind. Then I heard it. A low rumbling sound like thunder, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the house. It was a sound I couldn't quite place, but it made my blood run cold. "Run," I whispered, grabbing Ellie's hand. "We need to get out of here." But it was too late. The sound grew louder, more intense, and I could feel the ground shaking beneath my feet. The air was thick with a cold, damp smell, like rot and decay. And then I saw it. A faint, glowing light in the distance, coming from the kitchen. I pulled Ellie toward the stairs, but she resisted. "We can't leave," she said, her voice firm. "We have to face him." "Are you crazy?" I hissed. "We need to get out of here now." But she didn't move. "He's not going to stop until he finds us. We have to make him go away." I didn't have time to argue. The light was getting brighter, and the sound was almost deafening. I could feel it in my chest, a deep, resonant vibration that made it hard to breathe. And then I saw him, the 10th reindeer, dot-eyed. He was standing in the middle of the room, his black nose glowing with an otherworldly light. His eyes were filled with anger, with a deep, burning hatred. He was massive, his antlers reaching up to the ceiling, and his fur was matted and dirty, as if he had been crawling through the earth for years. He didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on me. I could feel his gaze, cold and unyielding. And then he spoke. His voice was low, rumbling, like thunder. It filled the room, echoing off the walls. "You remembered?" he said. "You shouldn't have remembered." I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Ellie was frozen beside me, her eyes wide with fear. The reindeer took a step closer, his hooves clicking against the floor. The sound was sharp like a knife against glass. And then he spoke again. "You called me," he said. "Now you have to let me in." I didn't understand. "Let you in? What are you talking about?" He took another step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "You remembered me. You called me back. Now I am here, and I won't leave until you remember everything." Ellie gasped beside me. "No," she whispered. "We didn't mean to." The reindeer's gaze shifted to her, and his voice softened slightly. "You remembered me. You called me. Now I have to come home." I didn't know what to do. The reindeer's anger seemed to fill the room, pressing down on me like a weight. I could feel his frustration, his pain. He had been forgotten for so long, left behind, and now that we had remembered him, he couldn't be ignored. "We didn't mean to hurt you," I said, my voice shaking. "We just wanted to know the truth." The reindeer's gaze returned to me. "The truth is dangerous," he said. "Some things are meant to be forgotten." And then he reached out with his hoof and touched the book on the table. The cover opened, and the pages began to turn on their own. The illustrations shifted, showing the reindeer standing alone, forgotten. And then they showed him falling, disappearing into the darkness. The book slammed shut and the reindeer turned to leave. But as he did, he looked back at me. "You should have forgotten," he said. "Now you can't." And with that, he was gone. The light disappeared, the sound stopped, and the house was quiet once more. I collapsed onto the floor, my heart racing. Ellie sat beside me, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" she whispered. I shook my head. "I don't know, but I think we're in trouble." The scratching sound returned, softer this time, but it was there, lingering in the background. And I knew that the 10th reindeer was still out there, waiting for us to remember, waiting for us to call him back. And I knew that eventually he would come. The choice. The air in the attic was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the tattered book resting in my lap. The dim light from the attic window cast long shadows across the walls, making the space feel smaller, more claustrophobic. Ellie sat beside me, her small hands clutching the edges of the book as if it might disappear at any moment. My sister stood by the attic door, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She hadn't said much since we'd found the book, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "Do you think it's true?" Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think Santa really banished him?" I hesitated. The more we uncovered, the more questions I had. But one thing was certain. The 10th reindeer wasn't just forgotten. It was erased. And now, by remembering, we brought it back. "Ellie," I said slowly, "I think Santa didn't guide him because he wasn't supposed to exist. He was a mistake, or something darker. Something that shouldn't have been part of Christmas at all." Ellie frowned, her brows knitting together. "But why? Why would Santa banish one of his reindeer?" "Maybe because it wasn't like the others," my sister interjected. Her voice was shaky, but there was a resolve in it that I hadn't heard before. "Maybe it was evil or cursed." I nodded. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The black-nosed reindeer wasn't just forgotten, it was hidden. Erased from every book, every song, every memory. And for a reason. "Remembering his name is how he comes back," I said, the words echoing in my mind. We shouldn't have looked for it. We shouldn't have remembered. But it was too late. We had remembered, and now, something was coming. Ellie's eyes widened. "What do we do? How do we stop him?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the reindeer's name was a key, and by saying it, we'd unlocked a door that should have stayed closed. As if on cue, a cold draft swept through the attic, extinguishing the faint light from the window. The sudden darkness was suffocating, and I heard Ellie gasp. My sister flipped on her phone's flashlight, casting a weak beam of light around the room. But it wasn't enough to chase away the shadows. The book in my lap felt heavier, as if it were pulling me down. I opened it, the pages crackling with an eerie sound like dry leaves underfoot. The illustrations had changed again. The 10th reindeer was closer now, its black nose glinting in the dim light. Its eyes seemed to stare straight through me, cold and unblinking. And then I saw it. A name written in the margins of the last page. It wasn't there before, I was sure of it. The letters were jagged and uneven, as if someone had carved them into the paper with a knife. Malam, I whispered, the word rolling off my tongue before I could stop it. The room seemed to freeze. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing in around us. And then, a sound. Distant at first, but growing louder. A low, guttural hum, like thunder on a summer night. It wasn't thunder, though. It was something else. Ellie grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What's that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I knew. The hum turned into a howl, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of something ancient, something that shouldn't exist, let alone be heard on a quiet Christmas Eve. The attic window rattled violently, the glass shaking so hard I thought it might shatter. My sister stepped forward, her phone's flashlight trembling in her hand. "We need to get out of here," she said. No, but I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the book, on the name that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Malam Datum, the 10th reindeer, the one who had been banished. And now, he was coming for us. The howl grew louder, closer, until it was almost deafening. The floor beneath us shook, and I heard the sound of hooves pounding against the roof. Not just any hooves. These were heavy, deliberate, and they sent vibrations through the entire house. Ellie screamed, her voice piercing the cacophony. It's here." I snapped out of my trance, grabbing the book and shoving it into my sister's arms. "Get Ellie out of here," I shouted over the din. "Now?" She didn't hesitate. Scooping up Ellie, she ran down the attic stairs, the flashlight's beam bobbing wildly. I followed close behind, my heart pounding in my chest. The howling grew louder, more intense, and I could feel the weight of the house shifting around us. We made it to the living room just as the first crash echoed through the house. It was a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before, wood splintering, glass shattering, and something else. Something wet. Something alive. The lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. I heard Ellie's frantic breathing, her small body pressed against my side. My sister fumbled for a candle, her hands shaking as she lit it with a trembling match. The flame cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it seem as though the room itself was moving. And then I saw it. A shadow. All tight, imposing, standing just beyond the edge of the light. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just watched. My sister saw it too. I could tell by the way she froze, the match still burning in her hand. The shadow didn't have a face, but I could feel its eyes on us. Cold, calculating, hungry, well. And then it stepped forward. The candle went out. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. I heard the sound of hooves again, this time inside the house. They were heavy, deliberate, and they stopped right in front of us. I didn't need to see it to know what it was. Malam Datum, the 10th reindeer, and he had come for us. By the time the lights flickered back on, the room was silent. The shadow was gone, but the air was thick with the scent of something bitter, something that made my stomach twist with nausea. Ellie was crying, her small body shaking uncontrollably. My sister held her tightly, her face pale. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, staring at the spot where the shadow had stood. We had to leave. We had to get as far away from this house, from this book, as possible. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Malam had found us, and he wouldn't stop until he took us back. Back to where? Back to what? I didn't want to know. All I knew was that Christmas would never be the same again. And neither would we. The reindeer that takes you. The night was heavy with an eerie silence, the kind that feels like a held breath. The power had gone out, plunging the house into darkness so thick it felt palpable. I lay in bed, my heart pounding as the cold seeped through the windows, frosting the glass with intricate patterns that sparkled faintly under the moonlight. It was then that I heard it, a faint scratching at the window like fingernails on wood. The sound was deliberate, steady, and it sent a chill down my spine. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as the scratch turned into a low, guttural rasp, lingering in the air like a threat. I threw off the covers and approached the window, my bare feet making soft creaks on the wooden floor. The scratching stopped as I reached the glass, and for a moment there was silence. Then a low, mournful bleat echoed through the night, a sound that was both familiar and yet completely alien. I hesitated, my hand reaching for the curtain, but something in me screamed to step back. Ignoring the voice, I pulled the curtain open, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the snow-covered yard, stood a figure. It was massive, at least 9 feet tall, its shape indistinct under the moonlight. But I could see its eyes, glowing faintly with an unnatural light, a deep, pulsing red, and its nose, black as coal, seemed to absorb the light around it, leaving a void where its face should have been. It was the 10th reindeer, the one we had found in the book, the one that had been forgotten. But now, it was back, and it was watching me. I slammed the window shut and leaned against it, my heart racing. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What was this creature? And why was it here? I tried to tell myself it was just a hallucination, a product of the stress and the strange occurrences of the past few weeks. But deep down, I knew better. This was real. I turned and ran to Ellie's room, flinging the door open. Her bed was empty, the covers thrown back as if she had gotten up in a hurry. I called her name, but there was no answer. I checked the bathroom, the living room, the kitchen, but she was nowhere to be found. The house was cold and silent, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden floorboards under my feet. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and stepped outside into the freezing night. The air was sharp, biting at my skin, and the snow crunched under my feet as I followed the trail of hoofprints leading into the woods. The prints were deep, as if something heavy had pressed into the snow, and they were spaced far apart, suggesting whatever made them had been moving fast. My breath came in short gasps, and my hands were trembling, but I pressed on, driven by a growing sense of dread. As I walked deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around me, casting long, ominous shadows on the ground. The flashlight's beam was weak, flickering occasionally, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. I called out for Ellie again, but the only response was the echo of my voice off the trees. The woods were alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, the distant howl of wind, but there was something else, something that didn't belong. A low, guttural breathing sound, deep and resonant, like the rumble of thunder on a summer day. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, and suddenly the trees opened up into a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood the reindeer, its massive form illuminated by the moon. Its eyes glowed with that same unnatural red light, and its black nose seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The breathing sound was coming from it, deep and rhythmic. As I watched, it lowered its head, the black nose pointing directly at me. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly power, and I could feel its gaze like a weight on my skin. And then I saw Ellie. She was standing just behind the reindeer, her small form silhouetted against its massive body. She wasn't moving, and for a moment, I thought she was a statue, frozen in place. But then, she turned her head and looked at me, her eyes black as coal, just like the reindeer's nose. She didn't seem to recognize me, and I felt a chill run down my spine as she spoke in a voice that wasn't her own, deep and resonant, echoing the reindeer's breathing. "He knows when you remember," she said, the words sending a shiver down my spine. I tried to move, to run to her, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The reindeer raised its head, and the glowing red eyes locked onto me. I felt a surge of fear, a primal, instinctive terror that I had never experienced before. The reindeer took a step forward, its hooves crunching in the snow, and I could feel the ground tremble under my feet. Ellie didn't move, didn't react, as if she were in a trance. "You should not have remembered," she repeated, her voice still not her own. Suddenly, the flashlight in my hand flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I heard the reindeer move, the sound of its hooves heavy in the stillness. I tried to scream, to call for help, but my voice caught in my throat. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of my bedroom, the sun streaming through the windows. It was morning and the house was quiet. I sat up, my head pounding, and looked around. Everything seemed normal, but I knew it wasn't. I got up and checked Ellie's room. She was there, fast asleep, her face peaceful. I let out a sigh of relief, telling myself it had all been a nightmare, a product of my overactive imagination. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the windowsill there was a hoofprint pressed into the dust, and on the floor a trail leading to Ellie's bed. I followed it, and what I saw made my heart stop. At the foot of her bed there was a single black hoofprint, pressed into the carpet as if something had stood there watching her sleep. I knelt down, my hand reaching out to touch it, and as I did, I felt a cold, dark energy emanating from it like a shadow lingering in the light. I knew then that it wasn't just a nightmare. The 10th reindeer was real, and it had come for us. And as I looked at the hoofprint, I realized that some secrets are better left buried, and some memories should never be remembered. The horror of that night stayed with me, a creeping sense of dread that lingered long after the dawn broke. And as I sat there staring at the hoofprint, I couldn't help but wonder if the darkness would ever truly leave us alone. The Whispering Hollow is a chilling tale of psychological horror where the lines between reality and madness blur, and the past refuses to stay buried. It's a story that taps into primal fears, the fear of the dark, the fear of the unknown, and the fear that the people closest to us may not be who they seem. With its vivid imagery, creeping suspense, and shocking twists, it's a story that will leave you on edge, wondering what's real and what's just a trick of the mind. In the heart of an ancient forest lies the forgotten town of Blackwood Hollow, a place where the trees seem to hum with secrets and the air is thick with the scent of decay. It's a town where time stands still and the locals whisper of a curse so old it feels like a part of the land itself. At the heart of this darkness is the tale of the Folklore family, a once prosperous clan of landowners whose legacy was shattered by a betrayal so vile it seeped into their bloodline like poison. They say Elizabeth Folcroft, the matriarch of the family, was a witch who dabbled in the forbidden arts of necromancy. Centuries ago, she was burned alive by the townsfolk, but not before she cursed her own descendants, vowing, "You will hear me in every tick of time, I will return." The Folcroft estate now stands in ruins, its towering spires and once grand halls consumed by ivy and rot. But the whispers persist, whispers that the Folcrofts never truly left. Their spirits linger, trapped between worlds, their anger and hatred festering into something far more sinister. The townsfolk avoid the estate, but they can't escape the feeling that they're being watched, that unseen eyes are peering from the shadows. This is not a story of ghosts or ghouls. It's a tale of how evil can seep into the closest bonds, family, friends, and lovers, and twist them beyond recognition. It's a story of guilt, betrayal, and the dark allure of power that comes at unimaginable costs. The story begins with Emma Carter, a 28-year-old woman who has just moved back to Blackwood Hollow after inheriting her estranged grandmother's old house. Emma struggles with schizophrenia, a condition that makes her question what's real and what's just a product of her fractured mind. She brings with her Max, her loyal golden retriever, who seems uneasy from the moment they arrive. The house creaks and groans as if it's alive, and the air inside feels heavy, like a physical presence pressing against her skin. At first, the strange occurrences are small. Emma hears faint ticking noises, like the sound of a grandfather clock, though no one has wound it in years. Max growls at empty corners, his fur standing on end, and the townsfolk seem reluctant to meet her eye. But as the nights grow darker, the noises grow louder, and Emma begins to feel like she's being pulled into something she can't understand. Then there's Thomas, the charming but mysterious handyman who offers to fix up the old house. He's always whistling an eerie tune, one that sounds uncannily like the ticking noise haunting Emma's nights. And then there's Sarah, Emma's childhood friend who warns her to leave Blackwood Hollow before it's too late. But it's already too late. One stormy night, Emma experiences her first vision, a vivid hallucination that feels far too real. She sees herself standing over Elizabeth Folcroft's grave, holding a bloody knife. When she wakes, there's dirt under her fingernails, and Max is nowhere to be found. As the days pass, the occurrences grow more disturbing. Animals begin to disappear, their carcasses found hanging from trees in grotesque patterns that resemble ancient runes. The forest feels alive, the trees looming like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. And then there's the diary, her grandmother's diary, hidden in the attic. It speaks of rituals, of white magic meant to counteract the Folcroft curse. But the pages are torn and smeared with something that looks like blood. The truth begins to unravel when Sarah reveals that she's known about the curse all along. But before Emma can process this, Thomas appears, his charm replaced by a sinister grin. He's been orchestrating everything, the disappearance of Max, the visions, the growing sense of dread. And he's not alone. Sarah, it turns out, is possessed by Elizabeth's spirit, her body a vessel for the vengeful witch. As Emma's schizophrenia spirals out of control, she struggles to differentiate between ally and enemy, reality and illusion. In a climactic confrontation in the basement, she faces Thomas and the dark forces he's unleashed. The room is filled with the sound of dripping water, the screech of nails scraping stone, and the ominous glow of a pentagram drawn in ash. Max reappears, injured but alive, attacking Thomas to save Emma. In a desperate bid to stop Elizabeth's return, Emma turns to the diary, invoking the white magic her grandmother had researched. But the cost is high. She must sacrifice herself to seal the portal and trap Elizabeth's spirit forever. As the light consumes her, Emma feels a fleeting moment of peace, her body dissolving into ash. Months later, Sarah inherits the house, vowing to keep its secrets buried. But late at night, she swears she hears faint ticking and sometimes a soft voice whispering her name. The curse may have been contained, but it's far from over. The legend of Blackwood Hollow. The forest whispered secrets long before anyone dared to listen. Deep within the ancient woods, where the trees grew twisted and the shadows stretched unnaturally long, lay the forgotten town of Blackwood Hollow. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the air felt heavy with the weight of centuries, and where the wind carried whispers that no one could quite decipher. But the locals knew the truth. Blackwood Hollow was cursed. Centuries ago, in the heart of this forsaken place, there lived a woman named Elizabeth Folcroft. She was the matriarch of the once prosperous Folcroft family, landowners who had built their wealth on the back of the land. But Elizabeth was no ordinary woman. She was a witch, and her power was feared by all who knew her. While some said she used her magic to heal and protect, others whispered that she dabbled in the dark arts, summoning forces beyond the understanding of mortal men. Her true nature remained a mystery, but one thing was certain. Her power was undeniable. Elizabeth's fate was sealed when the villagers, driven by fear and superstition, turned against her. They accused her of practicing necromancy, of summoning the dead and bending them to her will. The trial was swift, and the sentence was brutal. She was dragged to the edge of the forest, tied to a wooden stake, and set ablaze. The fire roared to life, consuming her body as the villagers watched in a mixture of horror and relief. But as the flames crackled and popped, Elizabeth's voice pierced through the chaos. Her final words echoed through the hollow. "You will hear me in every tick of time. I will return." The villagers tried to dismiss her curse as the rantings of a mad woman, but the strange occurrences that followed were impossible to ignore. Clocks would tick when no one was there to wind them. Shadows danced on the walls in the dead of night, and the wind carried whispers that sounded like Elizabeth's voice, calling out to her descendants, warning them that she would return. The Folcroft family, once the pride of Blackwood Hollow, began to fall apart. Their estate, once a grand mansion, crumbled into ruins. Their wealth disappeared, and their name became a cautionary tale. But the curse remained. It seeped into the bloodline, twisting and corrupting it. Some said the Folcrofts were cursed to repeat the sins of their ancestors, doomed to suffer for Elizabeth's wrongdoings. Others believed that the curse was a warning that Elizabeth's spirit still lingered, waiting for the perfect moment to return. The legend of Blackwood Hollow spread far and wide, but few dared to venture into the town. Those who did spoke of an unsettling feeling, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. They spoke of the ticking noise that seemed to follow them everywhere, a constant reminder of Elizabeth's promise. And they spoke of the whispers, the soft, persistent whispers that seemed to carry on the wind. But the legend wasn't just a story. It was a warning that some secrets were better left unspoken, and some places were better left untouched. For in Blackwood Hollow, the line between the living and the dead was thin, and the past had a way of catching up to the present. The story of Blackwood Hollow is not just a tale of ghosts or ghouls. It's a story about how evil can seep into the closest bonds, family, friends, and lovers, and twist them beyond recognition. It's a story about guilt, betrayal, and the dark allure of power that comes at unimaginable costs. And for one woman, it would become a story about survival, moving back home. The sun was setting as Emma Carter drove into the forgotten town of Blackwood Hollow, the golden hues of the setting sun casting long shadows over the neglected houses. The town was shrouded in an eerie silence as if time had forgotten it. Emma's heart raced as she approached her grandmother's old house, a place she had only visited once as a child. Now, at 28, she was back, inheriting the house after her grandmother's death. Her loyal golden retriever, Max, sat beside her, his ears folded back in unease. As Emma stepped out of the car, the creak of the door echoed through the stillness. The house loomed before her, its windows like empty eyes staring back, the once white paint peeled off, revealing the wooden bones beneath. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a smell that clung to her clothes as she walked towards the front door. Inside, the house was a labyrinth of memories. Dust motes swirled in the fading light and cobwebs clung to the chandeliers. Emma's footsteps echoed through the empty halls, each creak of the floorboards a reminder of the house's age. Max stayed close, his tail tucked between his legs, as if he too felt the heavy atmosphere. As she explored, a sound caught her attention, a steady, rhythmic tick-tock. She followed it to a grand room where an old grandfather clock stood, its face cracked, hands frozen in time. Yet the ticking continued, steady and relentless. Emma frowned, wondering who could have wound it. The last rays of sunlight danced across the walls as she approached, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and turn of their own accord. Night fell quickly, wrapping the house in darkness. Emma lit candles, their flickering flames casting eerie silhouettes on the walls. Max whimpered, his ears perked up as if he heard something. Emma listened, but there was only the ticking clock and the creaks of the old house. Still, the air felt thick, as if someone was watching her. As the hours passed, the ticking grew louder in her mind. Emma tried to distract herself by unpacking, but her hands trembled. Each noise made her jump, the creak of the stairs, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant howl of a stray animal. Max growled suddenly, his eyes fixed on a corner of the room. Emma followed his gaze, but saw nothing. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though her voice trembled. The wind outside picked up, carrying whispers through the trees. They were faint, indistinct, but they sent chills down Emma's spine. She told herself it was just the wind, but the words seemed to carry a name. Her name, Emma. She shut her eyes, wondering if it was real or just her mind playing tricks. As the night wore on, Emma tried to settle down, but sleep eluded her. The ticking clock was relentless, a metronome of unease. Max lay by her side, his breathing steady, but she could sense his restlessness. The darkness outside pressed in, making the shadows in the room seem alive. In the silence, Emma felt a presence, a cold spot in the air. She turned to Max, who was watching her intently. Just paranoia, she told herself, but the weight of the house's history pressed down on her. Her grandmother's house was supposed to be a fresh start, but now it felt like a trap. As she lay there, a whisper seemed to drift through the room, soft and urgent. Emma sat up, her heart pounding. "Hello?" she called, but only the ticking clock replied. Max was on his feet, growling at the corner of the room. Emma's breath caught as she saw a flicker of movement, a shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. She didn't sleep that night, her mind racing with questions. Was it real or just her schizophrenia? The line between reality and illusion blurred, leaving her with only doubt. As dawn broke, Emma watched the sun rise through the grimy windows, the light chasing away the shadows. But the ticking clock remained a constant reminder that something was amiss in Blackwood Hollow. And as she listened, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was waiting for her to uncover its secrets. Old friends and new enemies. The old wooden door creaked as Emma pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty hallway like a sigh from another era. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The air was thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. She had been back in Blackwood Hollow for only a week, but the weight of the past already pressed down on her like a physical force. Emma stepped inside, her feet creaking against the wooden floorboards. The house, once her grandmother's, was a labyrinth of memories, each room a portal to a time she thought she'd left behind. She had hoped returning might bring her peace, but the silence here was oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional tick of an unseen clock. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Emma hesitated, the knock echoing through the empty rooms. She peered through the peephole to see Sarah standing on the porch, her bright blue eyes sparkling with a mix of warmth and unease. Emma's childhood friend had changed little since they were kids, except for a newfound seriousness that shadowed her features. The door creaked open and Sarah stepped inside, her gaze darting around the room as if searching for something or someone. "It's good to see you, Emma," she said, her voice tinged with a nervousness that made Emma's stomach tighten. They hugged briefly, the embrace awkward but genuine. "You look well," Emma said, trying to sound casual despite the tension. They sat in the living room, surrounded by the echoes of a life left behind. The furniture was old, the chairs worn, but the memories were vivid. They had spent countless afternoons here, sharing secrets and laughter. Now, the room felt heavy with unspoken words. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I told you, Emma, you shouldn't be here. This house isn't safe." Her eyes pleaded for Emma to understand, but the words were vague, offering no answers. Before Emma could respond, another knock interrupted them. This time, it was firm, confident. Emma rose to answer it, expecting a neighbor or perhaps a delivery. What she found was a man standing on her porch, his presence commanding yet unsettling. "Thomas Brown," he introduced himself, his voice smooth and deep. "I heard you might need some help with the house. I'm handy with repairs." His smile was charming, but his eyes lingered on her a moment too long, making Emma uneasy. She hesitated, unsure if she should trust him. But there was something about him that felt familiar, like a memory just out of reach. "I could use some help," she admitted, stepping aside to let him in. As Thomas worked, the house seemed to hum with a new energy. He moved with a quiet confidence, his hands skilled as he fixed the creaking floorboards and leaky faucet. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, his eyes catching hers in fleeting glances. It was when she heard him humming that the first wave of dread washed over her. The tune was low and melancholic, reminiscent of the ticking noise that haunted her nights. She wondered if he knew about it, or if it was just a coincidence. The similarity was uncanny, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Later that day, while exploring the attic, Emma found an old broken mirror. Its surface was cracked, reflecting distorted images of the room. When she looked into it, she saw familiar faces, her grandmother, Sarah, even Thomas. But they were twisted, as if something had warped them from within. The mirror seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw a shadowy figure standing just behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. The house was silent, except for the ticking sound, which seemed louder now. Emma's breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she realized how alone she was. The mirror's reflection showed her distorted face, her eyes wide with fear. She turned away, leaving the attic and its secrets behind. That night, as darkness fell, Emma's anxiety spiked. The ticking sound was relentless, echoing in her mind long after she'd tried to distract herself. "Max," Her loyal golden retriever whimpered softly, sensing her unease. But when she reached out to pet him, he growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on a corner of the room. "What is it, boy?" Emma whispered, following his gaze. There was nothing there, but the air felt colder, the shadows deeper. She could have sworn she saw a flicker of movement, but it was gone before she could focus. The night stretched on, the silence punctuated by the occasional hoot of an owl outside. Emma's thoughts raced, her mind playing tricks on her. She wondered if it was just her schizophrenia, but the fear felt real, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. As she lay in bed, the ticking grew louder, more insistent. It was almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but the sound followed her into her thoughts, a constant reminder that she was not alone in the house. In the morning, Emma found Max acting strangely. He was agitated, his fur standing on end as he barked at the empty corners of the room. She tried to calm him, but he was beyond consolation. It was as if he sensed something she couldn't, something lurking just out of sight. Thomas returned that day, his presence a mix of comfort and unease. As he worked, Emma caught snippets of his humming, the same haunting tune. It was almost soothing, but the familiarity unnerved her. She found herself questioning whether she could trust him, whether his intentions were as pure as he seemed. In the evening, Sarah visited again, her earlier warning weighing heavily on Emma's mind. "What do you know about this place?" Emma pressed, her voice tinged with desperation. Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting around the room before settling on Emma. "Your grandmother was researching something," she said quietly. "She was trying to protect you, but I think she made a mistake. This house, it's not just a house. It's a trap." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of trap?" Before Sarah could answer, Thomas appeared in the doorway, his presence sudden and unexpected. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. Sarah nodded quickly. "Yeah, everything's fine." But Emma wasn't so sure. As Thomas turned to leave, she noticed something, a small, intricate pendant hanging around his neck. It glinted in the dim light, and for a moment it looked like a symbol she had seen before, something tied to the dark magic her grandmother had warned her about. "Thomas," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What's that?" He touched the pendant, a fleeting smile playing on his lips. "Just something I found. It's nothing important." But Emma wasn't convinced. The symbol seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and she could swear she felt its power calling to her, drawing her closer. She reached out, her hand brushing against it, and for a moment, she felt the surge of fear and anger, emotions that weren't her own. Thomas's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Emma saw something there that made her blood run cold. It was a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of knowledge that he shouldn't have. And in that moment, she realized that Thomas was not who he seemed to be. As the night wore on, Emma's unease grew. The ticking sound was louder now, echoing through the house like a countdown to something unknown. She tried to focus on her breathing, to calm the storm in her mind, but the fear was relentless. In the end, it was the sound that broke her. The ticking stopped, and in the silence, Emma felt a presence in her room. She lay still, her heart pounding as the air grew colder. And then she heard it, a whisper, soft and menacing, speaking a single word, "Emma." She screamed, but when the lights flickered on, there was no one there. The house was silent once more, except for the sound of her own ragged breathing. But the fear lingered, a constant reminder that she was not alone, and that the darkness was closing in. The first vision. The stormy night cast an eerie gloom over the crumbling house in Blackwood Hollow. The howling wind whistled through the cracks, sounding like a mournful sigh. Inside, Emma Carter sat in the dimly lit living room, the flickering flashlight casting shadows that danced like restless spirits on the walls. Her golden retriever, Max, lay by her feet, his uneasy breaths mirroring the tense atmosphere. The ticking sound, faint yet persistent, echoed in her mind, a reminder of the grandfather clock that hadn't worked in years. The storm outside seemed to amplify the creaks and groans of the old house, each sound making Emma's anxiety spike. As the night wore on, Emma's grip on reality began to slip. The ticking grew louder, mingling with the thunder's deep rumbles. The room started to spin, and she felt a familiar wave of disorientation wash over her, a hallmark of her schizophrenia. But this time, something was different. The disorientation gave way to a vivid vision, so real she could smell the damp earth and feel the cold rain on her skin. In her vision, Emma found herself standing in a moonlit graveyard. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the trees loomed like skeletal guards. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, and the distant howl of wind sounded like a chorus of the damned. Before her stood a weathered tombstone, the name Elizabeth Folcroft barely legible. A sudden chill ran through her as a knife materialized in her hand, its blade gleaming with blood. The vision shifted, and she saw a shadowy figure, Elizabeth, her eyes blazing with vengeance. "You will hear me in every tick of time I will return," Elizabeth's voice echoed. When Emma awoke, the storm had passed, leaving an unsettling calm. But her relief was short-lived. She noticed dirt caked under her fingernails, a grim reminder of the vision. Had she sleepwalked to the graveyard, or was something more sinister at play? The lines between reality and illusion blurred, leaving her with a gnawing fear. Later that day, Emma sought solace in her childhood friend, Sarah. Over steaming cups of tea, Sarah revealed a shocking truth. Emma's grandmother had delved into white magic to counteract the Folcroft curse. But the rituals had gone horribly wrong, leaving behind a trail of dark consequences. The ticks Emma heard were a warning, a sign that the curse was reawakening. The vision, Sarah explained, was more than just a hallucination. It was a premonition, a glimpse into the evil that had haunted their family for centuries. As the truth sank in, Emma felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. The vision, the ticking, the dirt under her nails, it all pointed to a legacy of darkness she couldn't escape. The fear of losing control and the weight of her family's cursed past threatened to overwhelm her, leaving her questioning what was real and what was just her mind playing tricks. The storm outside may have passed, but the tempest within her had only just begun. Animals start disappearing. The sun had barely risen over Blackwood Hollow, casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. Emma stood at the kitchen window, sipping her coffee, her eyes fixed on the spot where Max usually waited for her. But today, there was only the faint mist of morning dew glistening on the grass. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach as she called out again. "Max, where are you?" Her voice echoed back, unanswered. She set the cup down, the ceramic clinking softly against the counter. The air felt heavy and the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the distant call of a bird. Emma's breath quickened as she grabbed the screen door handle, the metal cold against her palm. "Max!" she shouted once more, her voice cracking with worry. Stepping outside, the dew-kissed grass squelched beneath her feet. She walked around the house, her eyes scanning the perimeter. That's when she saw it. A set of claw marks gouged into the wooden floor near the door. Her heart raced as she knelt down, tracing the deep gashes with her finger. They were fresh, the wood splintered and raw. Max's nails were rusty from age, but these marks looked sharper, almost deliberate. "Max!" she called again, louder now, her voice trembling. The forest beyond the house seemed to hum with an ominous energy, the trees towering like silent sentinels. Emma felt a chill run down her spine as she followed the trail of marks leading into the woods. The trees closed in around her, casting dappled shadows that danced ominously on the ground. Every snap of a twig made her jump, her senses heightened to a fever pitch. As she walked deeper into the forest, the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. Emma's stomach churned as she pushed through a thicket of brambles. What she saw made her blood run cold. Animals, squirrels, rabbits, even a deer, hung from the trees, their bodies arranged in a pattern that looked almost like a twisted rune. The limbs were contorted, the eyes frozen in terror. Flies buzzed around them, their hum filling the air with an eerie drone. Emma's breath came in short gasps as she approached the macabre display. The carcasses were cold to the touch, their fur stiff. She noticed something else. Each animal had a small incision near the heart, neat and precise. This wasn't the work of a wild predator. It was deliberate, ritualistic. The metallic smell was stronger now, and she realized it was blood, mixed with something earthy and pungent. Suddenly, twigs snapped behind her. Emma spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. There was nothing there, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. She turned back to the grisly scene, her mind racing. Was this real? Or was her schizophrenia playing tricks on her again? The lines between reality and illusion were blurring, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking further into a nightmare. As she stood there, frozen in fear, a distant hoot echoed through the forest. An owl's soft hoo-hoo. The sound was comforting yet eerie, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Emma took a deep breath and reached into her pocket for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Sarah's number, the digits blurring on the screen. But as she waited for an answer, she heard another sound, leaves crunching, heavy, and deliberate, coming from the edge of the clearing. Her heart sank as Thomas emerged from the shadows, his boots kicking up dust with each step. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made Emma's skin crawl. "Need some help, Emma?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, yet laced with an underlying menace. Emma hesitated, unsure of what to say. But before she could respond, Thomas was beside her, examining the carcasses with an intensity that made her uneasy. "This isn't just about animals," he muttered, his breath visible in the chill morning air. "It's a sign." "A sign of what?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas turned to her, his eyes glinting in the morning light. "A sign that things are about to get a lot worse." As he spoke, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves with an ominous whisper. Emma felt a cold dread creeping up her spine, her thoughts spiraling into paranoia. Was this real? Or was it all in her head? The forest seemed to close in around her, the shadows deepening into menacing forms. She knew she had to get out of there, but her legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything was still. The wind died down. The owl's hoot faded into silence. Emma was left with the unsettling feeling that she was trapped in a living nightmare, with no escape in sight. The forest held its breath, waiting for the next move, as Emma's world teetered on the edge of chaos. The diary. The attic was a labyrinth of shadows, each corner hidden behind a veil of dust and forgotten memories. Sunlight struggled through the grimy window, casting dim rays that danced with motes of dust. Emma coughed as she moved through the thick air, her footsteps echoing softly on the wooden floorboards. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay and old books. She had been cleaning for hours, but the attic seemed endless, each box and trunk revealing more secrets than she could handle. As she pushed aside an old trunk, a book fell to the floor with a soft thud. Emma picked it up, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. It was a diary, her grandmother's name embossed on the front in faded gold letters. A shiver ran down her spine as she opened it, the pages crackling with age. The handwriting inside was familiar, yet different, more urgent, more frantic. She sat down cross-legged on the floor, the diary resting on her knees. The first entry spoke of rituals and incantations of a desperate attempt to banish a spirit. Emma's heart raced as she read about Elizabeth Folkloft, her name written with underlines and exclamation points. The diary detailed her grandmother's fears, her obsession with breaking the curse that had haunted their family for centuries. As she turned the pages, Emma noticed something odd. The entries became shorter, the handwriting more erratic. The last entry was barely legible, the words trailing off mid-sentence. The page was torn, jagged edges where the paper had been ripped away. A dark stain marred the corner, resembling dried blood. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she turned to the next page, only to find it blank, except for a single word: run. She flipped through the remaining pages, her fingers trembling. They were all blank, except for a few scattered symbols, drawn in the same dark ink as the stain. They looked like runes, but she didn't recognize them. They seemed to shift as she looked at them, twisting into shapes that made her stomach turn. As she read aloud, the air in the attic grew colder. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch, elongating into shapes that looked like skeletal fingers reaching for her. The candle she had brought with her flickered, casting eerie patterns on the walls. Emma felt a presence in the room as if something was watching her, listening to her read. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it was just her imagination. But the words on the page seemed to echo in her mind, the symbols burning into her retina. She closed the diary, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence in the attic was oppressive, broken only by the faint creaking of the old house. As she stood up, the floorboards creaked beneath her feet. She turned to leave, but something caught her eye. The shadows on the wall seemed to have moved, forming a pattern that looked almost like a hand. It was reaching for her, the fingers stretching towards her face. Emma froze, her breath coming in short gasps. The hand on the wall seemed to pulse, as if it were alive. She could feel its cold breath on her skin, the tips of its fingers brushing against her cheek. She tried to scream, but her voice was trapped in her throat. Suddenly, the candles went out, plunging the attic into darkness. The hand on the wall disappeared, leaving behind only the faintest trace of its presence. Emma stumbled forward, her hands outstretched in front of her. She could feel the diary still clutched in her hand, its cover cold and damp. As she made her way down the stairs, the darkness seemed to follow her, pressing in on her from all sides. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the presence in the attic was still with her. The symbols from the diary kept flashing in her mind, their twisted shapes making her feel sick. When she reached her bedroom, she locked the door behind her, her hands shaking as she turned the key. The diary lay on her bed, its cover seeming to glow in the dim light. She knew she shouldn't open it again, but she couldn't resist. The words on the pages seemed to call to her, drawing her back into their dark, twisted world. As she read, the shadows in her room began to move, twisting into shapes that looked like hands, like faces, like eyes. The air grew colder, the presence closing in around her. Emma knew she had to stop, but she couldn't. The diary had her in its grasp, and she couldn't escape. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the symbol on the page, its twisted lines reaching out to her like a hand. And then, everything went black. Betrayal. The air was thick with tension as Emma and Sarah sat in the dimly lit living room. The flickering light of a single candle cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it seem as though unseen figures danced around them. Emma's hands trembled as she held the diary, its pages yellowed with age and stained with what looked like dried blood. Sarah's confession hung in the air like a challenge, each word a dagger to Emma's heart. "I knew about the curse," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to protect you, Emma. I didn't want you to get hurt." Emma's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. "Protect me? By lying to me? By letting me walk into this nightmare blind?" Before Sarah could respond, a knock echoed through the room. It was a soft, deliberate tap, 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 like the ticking clock that haunted Emma's nights. The sound sent a shiver down her spine, and she exchanged a wary glance with Sarah. "Are you expecting someone?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. Sarah shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. The knocking persisted, each tap growing louder, more insistent. Emma rose, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached the door, the knocking stopped. The silence was oppressive, heavy with anticipation. With a deep breath, Emma opened the door. Thomas stood on the porch, his charming smile twisted into something sinister. His eyes gleamed with a knowing light, and his presence seemed to fill the doorway, casting a dark shadow over the room. "Hello, Emma," he said, his voice smooth, almost melodic. "We need to talk." Emma's instincts screamed at her to shut the door, to lock it, and never look back. But her feet felt rooted to the spot. Thomas stepped inside, his movements fluid, almost predatory. "You see, Emma," he began, his voice low and hypnotic, "I've been waiting a long time for this moment." Sarah's expression shifted, her eyes clouding over as if a storm brewed behind them. Emma noticed the change but couldn't place it. "What are you talking about, Thomas?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. Thomas chuckled, the sound sending chills down her spine. "You're so clever, Emma, but you've been in the dark for far too long." He paused, letting the silence stretch before he continued. "Max's disappearance, the visions, the ticking noise, it's all part of a bigger plan, a plan I've been orchestrating." Emma's breath caught. "Where's Max?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Thomas shrugged, his smile widening. "Oh, Max is safe. For now." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "You see, Emma, you're special. You have a role to play in this, one that's been centuries in the making." Sarah moved then, her steps slow and deliberate. "Thomas, stop this," she said, her voice low and urgent. But Thomas ignored her, his focus on Emma. "Elizabeth's curse, it's alive and well, and you, Emma, are the key to bringing her back." The room seemed to spin around Emma. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, and for a moment she questioned her own reality. Was this real, or was it another hallucination? But the fear in Sarah's eyes told her this was all too real. Sarah stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "Thomas, you can't do this. You can't use her like this." Thomas turned to her, his expression cold. "And I'm not. You've been playing your part perfectly, Sarah. The loyal friend, the confidante. All the while you've been helping me every step of the way." Emma's eyes snapped at Sarah. "What? No, that's not true." But Sarah's silence was deafening. Her eyes met Emma's, and for a moment, Emma saw something there, something that didn't belong. It was a flicker of darkness, a shadow that didn't match Sarah's bright, warm personality. "No," Emma whispered, her heart breaking. "Sarah, tell me it's not true." Sarah's face twisted, her lips curling into a snarl. "You're so blind, Emma," she spat, her voice no longer her own. "You've always been so blind." As Emma watched in horror, Sarah's body began to change. Her eyes turned black as coal, her skin pale and almost translucent. Her voice dropped to a growl, and when she spoke, it was not Sarah's voice at all. "Hello, Emma," the voice said, thick and menacing. "I've been waiting." Emma stumbled back, her mind reeling. "What are you?" she whispered. The thing that Sarah laughed once, the sound echoing with malice. "I am Elizabeth, and you, dear Emma, are mine." The room seemed to close in around Emma. The shadows deepened, twisting into sinister shapes that watched her with cold, dead eyes. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing in on her from all sides. She could feel the weight of the curse bearing down on her, the darkness clawing at her mind, her soul. And in the midst of it all, Thomas stood, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You see, Emma," he said, his voice dripping with malice, "you've been living in a nightmare all along, and now it's time to wake up." As the darkness closed in, Emma realized the horrifying truth. She was not just fighting for her sanity or her life. She was fighting for her very soul. And in this twisted game of betrayal and horror, the line between reality and illusion was thinner than ever before. Descent into madness. The storm outside seemed to echo the chaos in Emma's mind. Rain lashed against the windows, casting eerie shadows on the walls, while thunder boomed like a distant drum. The old house creaked and groaned, its wooden beams shuddering under the force of the wind. Emma sat on the floor of her dimly lit bedroom, her hands trembling as she clutched the diary she had found in the attic. The words on the pages were smudged and torn, but one sentence stood out to her: "The curse cannot be broken without sacrifice." Emma's mind raced. She could no longer tell what was real and what was just a product of her schizophrenia. The voices in her head grew louder, more insistent, whispering terrible things about the people she trusted most. "Sarah is lying to you," one voice hissed. "Thomas is using you," another chimed in. And then, most terrifying of all, "You're just like Elizabeth." But tonight, something felt different. The ticking sound she had grown accustomed to was now louder, more urgent. It wasn't just in her head. It was coming from somewhere in the house. Slowly, Emma got to her feet, her bare feet cold against the floor. She followed the sound downstairs, each step creaking beneath her weight. The air grew colder with each descent, and the shadows around her seemed to twist into shapes that watched her every move. When she reached the basement, the ticking stopped. The silence was deafening. Emma fumbled for the light switch, but it didn't work. Instead, a faint glow emanated from the far corner of the room. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. There, etched into the floor, was a pentagram drawn in ash. It glowed faintly, casting an eerie light over the space. In the center of the symbol stood a small, ornate box. It was open, and a dark mist swirled inside. Sudden growl broke the silence. Max, her golden retriever, emerged from the shadows, his fur matted and dirty. His eyes locked onto something behind her, and he barked furiously. Emma turned, and that was when she saw him, Thomas, standing in the doorway, his eyes black as coal, his smile twisted and sinister. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Where's Max?" Emma demanded, her voice shaking. "What have you done with him?" Thomas chuckled. "Oh, Max is fine. He's just occupied. You see, Emma, you've been chosen for something greater, something your grandmother couldn't finish." Emma backed away, her mind spiraling. The voices in her head were screaming now, telling her to run, to hide, to fight. But her legs felt like lead and her vision blurred. The room seemed to spin around her. And then everything went black. When Emma came to, she was lying on the floor, her head throbbing. The room was silent once more, but the air felt heavy, charged with something dark and ominous. She sat up slowly, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch Max. He was lying beside her, his fur cold to the touch. For a moment she thought he was dead, but then he stirred, his tail wagging weakly. "Max," she whispered, relief flooding through her. "Max, are you okay?" But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her blood run cold. His pupils seemed to flicker, like embers glowing in the dark. He growled low in his throat, a sound she had never heard before. "Max?" she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. And then, in an instant, he was on his feet, his teeth bared in a snarl. Emma screamed, scrambling backward as Max lunged at her. She fell hard onto the floor, her palms scraping against the concrete. The sound of her own scream echoed in her ears, but it was drowned out by the thunder crashing outside. Suddenly, everything stopped. Max froze, his growl cutting off mid-snarl. He turned his head, his ears perking up as if he had heard something. Emma lay there, her heart pounding, as the room filled with the sound of whispers. Low, raspy whispers that seemed to come from all around her. "You," the voices hissed. "You should have stayed gone." Emma's breath came into short gasps as the shadows around her began to move, twisting into shapes that looked almost human. She could feel eyes on her, cold and unblinking. The air grew colder and she could see her breath misting in front of her. And then she saw it. A figure, tall and imposing, standing just beyond the reach of the faint light. Its presence seemed to fill the room, pressing down on her like a weight. Emma tried to scream again, but her voice caught in her throat. The figure took a step closer, its form shifting and flowing like smoke. Emma's mind reeled as she realized what she was seeing. It wasn't just a hallucination. It was real. And it was coming for her. In a panic, Emma scrambled to her feet and ran, the sound of her bare feet slapping against the concrete floor echoing through the basement. She could hear the figure behind her, its movements heavy and deliberate. Max, now silent, watched her go, his glowing eyes fixed on her fleeing form. The storm outside seemed to grow more intense, the thunder booming louder, the rain pounding harder against the windows. Emma didn't dare look back. She didn't dare stop. She knew that if she did, she would never escape. Finally, she reached the stairs, her hands shaking as she grabbed the railing. She pulled herself up, her legs trembling beneath her. The figure was closer now, its cold breath brushing against the back of her neck. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The whispers ceased, the shadows stilled, and the figure vanished. Emma collapsed onto the stairs, her body shaking uncontrollably. She looked down at her hands and saw that they were streaked with dirt and blood. She didn't know where it came from, and she didn't care. All she wanted was to get out of there. But as she turned to flee, she saw something that made her heart stop. On the wall, scrawled in blood, was a single word, "Mein Day." Emma didn't wait to see what happened next. She ran. Final confrontation. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay as Emma descended into the musty basement. Her heart pounded in her chest like a blacksmith's hammer, the sound echoing in her ears. The walls, lined with cobweb-covered stones, seemed to press in around her, making it hard to breathe. The flickering flashlight in her hand cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it seem as though unseen hands were reaching out to grab her. She could feel the weight of the house bearing down on her, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden beams. Emma had spent hours poring over her grandmother's diary, deciphering the cryptic symbols and rituals that might hold the key to stopping Elizabeth's curse. The words on the pages seemed to leap out at her, the ink bleeding in the dim light. She had gathered what she needed: a circle of salt, a vial of holy water, and a silver dagger that gleamed in the light. But as she began to set up the ritual, her mind began to play tricks on her. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and she could swear she heard whispers in the corners of the room. She knew it was just her schizophrenia, but it didn't make it any less terrifying. As she lit the candles, the flames danced and spat, casting an eerie glow over the room. The air grew colder, and she could see her breath misting in front of her. She closed her eyes and began to chant, her voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with each word. The words of the ritual felt strange on her tongue, but she pressed on, determined to see it through. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, and she spun around, her heart racing. Thomas stood in the shadows, his eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. His presence was imposing, his voice low and menacing as he stepped into the circle of light. "You really think you can stop her?" he sneered, his lips curling into a snarl. "Elizabeth's power is beyond anything you can imagine, and with you out of the way, nothing will stand in her way." Emma's breath came in short gasps, her hands trembling as she clutched the dagger. "I won't let that happen," she said, her voice firm despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Thomas laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. "You're too late for that," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "The ritual is already in motion, and you're just in time to see the end." As he spoke, the air in the room began to shift and swirl, the shadows coalescing into a dark, formless mass. Emma could feel the weight of the curse bearing down on her, the air growing colder until it felt like she was breathing ice. She could hear Elizabeth's voice, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from all around her. "You will hear me every tick of time. I will return." Emma's eyes snapped open, and she saw that the candles had gone out, plunging the room into darkness. The only sound was the heavy, labored breathing of the thing in the corner. Slowly, the darkness began to take shape, forming into the figure of a woman. Elizabeth's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her presence filled the room with an unspeakable horror. Emma's mind reeled as she tried to focus on the ritual. She could feel the weight of her grandmother's words in her mind, the power of the white magic coursing through her veins. But as she raised the dagger, she felt a hand on her shoulder, cold and clammy. She spun around, but there was no one there. "Emma!" a voice whispered in her ear, the sound sending shivers down her spine. "You don't have to do this." It was Sarah's voice, but it was different, twisted. Emma turned, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Sarah stood behind her, her eyes black as coal, her skin deathly pale. But it wasn't Sarah. It was Elizabeth, her spirit inhabiting Sarah's body. "You can't stop me," Elizabeth hissed, her voice like a snake slithering through grass. "I will return, and you will be the one to bring me back." Emma's heart broke as she realized the truth. Sarah, her childhood friend, the one person she had trusted, was gone, and in her place was the vengeful spirit of Elizabeth Folklore. With a surge of adrenaline, Emma plunged the dagger into her own chest. The pain was excruciating, but she didn't falter. As she fell to her knees, she could feel the power of the white magic coursing through her, trapping Elizabeth's spirit in a prison of light. The room erupted in a blinding flash, the sound of thunder crashing through the small space. The air was filled with the acrid smell of burning flesh, and the darkness seemed to scream in rage as it was banished. When the light faded, Emma lay on the floor, her body still and unresponsive. Max, who had been hiding in the shadows, emerged and nuzzled her gently, his whimpers filling the silence. But as the light faded, Emma felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had saved the town of Blackwood Hollow, but at a great cost. Her body slowly turned to ash, scattering across the floor as the curse was finally broken. In the end, it was Max who remained, his mournful howl echoing through the empty house, a reminder of the sacrifice that had been made. The house was quiet once more. The curse lifted, but the memory of Emma Carter would linger in the hollow, a testament to the power of love and sacrifice in the face of unimaginable evil. The legacy lives on. In the faint moonlight, the silhouette of Emma's house loomed over Blackwood Hollow, its windows like empty eyes staring back. Months had passed since Emma's tragic end, yet the air still carried an eerie silence, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Sarah stood at the doorstep, the rusty key trembling in her hand. She had inherited the house, a place she once feared, now her reluctant home. As she stepped inside, the creak of the old wooden floorboards echoed through the empty halls. The air was heavy with dust, and the faint scent of decay lingered, a reminder of the house's dark past. Sarah's breath hitched as she switched on the light, her eyes scanning the room. Everything seemed untouched, as if time had paused when Emma left. But it wasn't just the dust and shadows that made her uneasy. It was the feeling of being watched. She tried to shake off the unease, focusing on the task of sorting through Emma's belongings. But the silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint tick-tock of a clock somewhere in the house. Sarah frowned. She hadn't noticed a clock before. Her footsteps echoed as she traced the sound to the living room, where an old grandfather clock stood, its hands frozen at midnight. A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered Emma's stories about the ticking noise that haunted her nights. Determined to settle in, Sarah busied herself with unpacking. But as night fell, the shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting into shapes that seemed to move out of the corner of her eye. The wind outside whispered through the trees, a low hum that sounded almost like a name being called. Sarah, Sarah. She spun around, but there was no one there. The clock's ticking grew louder, and for a moment she could have sworn it was in sync with her racing heartbeat. Sleep eluded her, her mind racing with thoughts of Emma and the curse that took her. She had always been skeptical, but now, alone in the house, she couldn't deny the eerie presence that lingered. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and the ticking clock felt like a countdown to something dreadful. Days passed, and the occurrences grew more frequent. Doors creaked open on their own, and the whisper of a name became clearer. Sarah's anxiety spiked, her grip on reality faltering. She began to question her own sanity, much like Emma had. One night, she awoke to find the room cold, the shadows twisted into skeletal fingers reaching for her. The clock's ticking was deafening, and as she sat up, she saw a figure in the doorway, tall, shadowy, and watching. Sarah screamed, but the figure vanished when she turned on the light. Shaken, she called an old friend, Alex, who promised to stay with her. But as they talked, Sarah noticed something odd. The ticking had stopped. The silence was more unsettling than the noise ever was. Alex's presence brought temporary comfort, but as the days went on, the strange events continued. One evening, while organizing the attic, Sarah found an old diary hidden under a stack of books. It was Emma's grandmother's, filled with notes about the curse and white magic rituals. As she read, the air grew colder, and the ticking resumed, louder than before. The words on the pages seemed to shift, revealing a hidden message. The legacy lives on. That night, Sarah awoke to the sound of her name being whispered, this time right beside her. The clock ticked furiously, and as she turned, she saw a shadowy figure looming over her. It reached out, its form shifting until it resembled Emma, but as Sarah watched in horror, Emma's face twisted into a malevolent grin, her eyes black as coal. The figure spoke in a voice that echoed with an otherworldly resonance. "The curse doesn't end with me." Sarah's scream was drowned out by the clock's deafening tick-tock. When the noise subsided, the figure was gone, but the ticking remained, a constant reminder that the curse was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Sarah became withdrawn, her paranoia eating away at her. She couldn't distinguish between reality and illusion, much like Emma before her. The townsfolk noticed her isolation, but no one dared approach the accursed house. The Whispering Hollow had claimed another soul, and the legacy of the Folklore curse continued to unfold. As autumn leaves fell, the house stood as a testament to the evil that lingered within its walls. The ticking clock was its heartbeat, a slow countdown to the next victim. And in the darkness, a soft voice whispered through the trees, calling out for the next to inherit the curse, ensuring that the legacy of Blackwood Hollow would never truly die. In the end, Sarah understood the terrible truth. Some evils are ancient, some curses unbreakable, and the past never truly stays buried. The Whispering Hollow had claimed another, and the ticking clock echoed through the night, a haunting reminder that the horror was far from over. I still remember the night it happened. I never believed in curses, demons, or the things that lurk in the dark, until I moved into that house. It was a simple place, 2 stories, creaky floors, an overgrown backyard. My mother told me it had been abandoned for years, but I got it cheap. Too cheap. The real estate agent had acted strangely, avoiding eye contact and muttering something about the house needing the right owner. But I wasn't superstitious. I didn't care about rumors. All I cared about was having a place to call my own, far from the arguments with my mother that had been tearing us apart for months. The first night was fine. Second, I noticed the doors wouldn't stay closed. No matter how many times I shut them, they'd creak back open. I wrote it off as the old house settled, but by the third night, the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, always at 3 a.m. I ignored it until I found the symbols carved under my bed. They were strange, ancient markings deep into the wood, as if scratched by fingernails. My phone glitched when I tried to take a picture, the screen flickering with static. That was when I found the journal in the basement. It belonged to the last owner. The pages were torn, stained, the handwriting frantic. Do not answer the knocks. Do not say his name. If you do, he will come. My blood ran cold, because the last page was dated exactly 1 year ago, and scrawled at the bottom in fresh ink, I am still here. That was when the lights flickered out, and from the hallway I heard footsteps. Coming toward me, the house that waited. Emily stood before the house, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air. The once white paint was peeling, revealing weathered wood beneath, like the skin of an old tired creature. The porch creaked in the wind, a low, mournful groan that echoed through the empty street. The garden was overgrown, weeds tangled around the remains of what once were rose bushes, their thorns reaching out like skeletal fingers. "Emily, are you sure about this?" her mother asked, clutching the car door tightly. Concern etched her face, deepening the lines around her eyes. "I've never been surer, Mom," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the shiver running down her spine. "It's perfect, and it's all mine." The real estate agent, Mr. Smith, hovered nearby, his eyes darting between Emily and the house. He fidgeted with the keys, his fingers trembling as he handed them over. "So, Miss Emily, if you have any questions, you know who to call." His voice was too cheerful, forced, and he avoided her gaze. Emily took the keys, the metal cold in her palm. "Thanks, Mr. Smith. I think I've got it." As he hurried away, Emily noticed the neighbors watching from their windows, their faces hidden behind curtains. The street was quiet, save for the rustling leaves and distant hum of a car. It was as if the house was an island, isolated and untouched. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted on the walls. The floor creaked beneath her feet, a rhythmic groan with each step, like the house itself was sighing. "Emily, maybe we should talk about this," her mother began, following her into the living room. The room was bare, the walls stripped of paint, leaving patches of plaster exposed. "Mom, it's fine. I can fix this place up. It just needs some love," Emily said, running her hand over the back of an old armchair, the rough fabric and worn. Just then, her friend Matt appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. "You sure about this, Em? This place gives me the creeps," he said, his voice low and serious. Emily rolled her eyes, a smile tugging at her lips. "It's just old, Matt. It needs some work, that's all." But as she said it, a chill ran through her. She felt it first in her toes, the cold seeping up through the floorboards. It spread, wrapping around her ankles, her calves, until she shivered. She glanced around, but her mother and Matt were busy unpacking boxes, obliviously. "Let's get the rest of the stuff," Matt said, breaking the silence. "I'll go get the last box from the car." As he left, Emily's mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "I just want you to be safe, you know. This house, it feels off." "It's just settling, Mom," Emily replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, the house seemed to hum around her. The creaks and groans were louder, more insistent. She closed her eyes, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. But the air felt heavy, pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. And then she heard it. A faint whisper, just as she drifted off to sleep. It was soft, indistinct, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She sat up, her heart pounding, but the house was silent once more. Probably just the wind, she told herself, lying back down. But the sense of unease lingered, a shadow in the corner of her mind. She knew she wasn't alone, not really. The house was waiting, patient and still, for something to begin. The knocking at 3 a.m. The first 2 nights were quiet. Too quiet. The creaks of the old house didn't bother me much. I told myself it was just the wooden bones settling, like an old man stretching his joints. But on the 3rd night, something changed. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my phone casting a dim glow on the walls. It was 2:58 a.m. 2 minutes later, the knocking started. Knock-da-da. Knock. Knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, each one echoing through the house like a heartbeat in the darkness. My skin prickled. The sound wasn't loud, but it was distinct, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side of the door didn't want to be ignored. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I told myself it was just the wind or a stray animal. But then it happened again. Knock-die. Knock-out-eye. Knock. This time, it was louder. The knock seemed to come from outside my bedroom door. My heart raced as I tossed off the covers and approached the door slowly. I pressed my ear against the cold wood. Silence. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I opened the door a crack. The hallway was dark and empty. The air felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. I stepped out, my bare feet creaking against the floor. The knocking didn't come again, but it didn't need to. I knew I wasn't alone. The next night, the knocking started again at exactly 3 a.m. This time, I didn't wait. I threw on a hoodie and rushed downstairs, yanking open the front door. The porch was empty. The street was silent. The only sound was the distant hum of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the overgrown backyard. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, my heart pounding. But as I turned to go back upstairs, I noticed something strange. On the wall near the stairs, a faint scratch mark glowed in the dim light. It looked fresh, like fingernails had clawed at the paint. That's when I remembered the symbols. Under my bed, I found strange carvings earlier that day. They were deep grooves in the wooden floorboards, as if someone had spent hours scratching them into the surface. The markings looked ancient, twisted and angular, like nothing I'd ever seen before. I'd written it off as the work of a previous tenant, but now, staring at the scratches on the wall, I wasn't so sure. The knocking happened again the following night. This time it was inside the house. It came from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It was everywhere and nowhere. I couldn't escape it. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the screen flickered and went black. When it turned back on, I had a text from an unknown number. It's starting. I didn't respond. I didn't dare. Instead, I went downstairs to the basement. The air down there was colder, heavier. I fumbled for the light switch, but the bulb flickered and died. In the darkness, I found the journal. It was tucked between 2 stacks of rotting boxes. The cover was leather, worn and cracked, and the pages inside were torn and stained. The handwriting was frantic, slanted, as if the writer had been in a hurry. "Do not answer the knocks," one entry read. "Do not say his name. If you do, He will come. The last page was dated exactly 1 year ago. But at the bottom, in fresh ink, someone had scrawled, "I am still here." The words sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't alone. Whatever had been in the house before me was still there. And now, it knew I was here too. As I closed the journal, the lights flickered back to life. But it was too late. The knocking had already started again. This time, it wasn't alone. The symbols under the bed. The third night was different. It wasn't just the eerie silence that unsettled me, but the way the air felt heavier, like something invisible was pressing down on my chest. I had managed to ignore the knocking for 2 nights, but now, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every groan of the old wooden beams sounded like footsteps. I told myself it was just the house settling, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the screen flickered oddly, like a static interfering with the signal. When I looked closer, the time on my phone read 3:00 a.m. Exactly. I froze as the familiar knocking echoed through the hallway. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My heart raced and my palms grew sweaty. I threw the covers off and stepped onto the cold floor, my bare feet making a soft creak as I moved. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. No one answered. I approached the bedroom door cautiously, peering through the crack. The hallway was dark, the moonlight barely filtering through the grimy windows. I stepped out, my eyes scanning the empty space. There was no one there, just the faint echo of the knocks lingering in the air. I returned to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. But as I leaned against it, I noticed something odd. The bed, an old wooden frame, seemed slightly off. I pushed it away from the wall, and that's when I saw them. Strange, ancient symbols carved into the floorboards. They were deep, as if someone had scratched them with fingernails, and they looked fresh. Too fresh. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt down, tracing the symbols with my finger. They felt sharp, jagged, and they seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen flickered again, this time going black. When it turned back on, I had an incoming call from an unknown number. My heart pounded as I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" I said. My voice was trembling. No one replied. Instead, I heard a low, distorted voice, like static, repeating a single word. "Mine!" My blood ran cold. I dropped the phone and then scrambled to my feet, backing away from the bed as if the symbols might leap off the floor and grab me. That's when I noticed it, a faint, pungent smell, like sulfur and rot, filling the room. I grabbed my flashlight and hurried downstairs to the basement, determined to find answers. The air grew colder as I descended, the smell intensified. I fumbled through the dusty boxes until I found an old leather-bound journal. It belonged to the last owner, and as I flipped through the pages, the handwriting grew more frantic, the words spilling across the paper in a mad scramble. "Do not answer the knocks. Do not say his name. If you do, he will come." The last page was dated exactly 1 year ago, and at the bottom, in fresh ink, someone had scrawled, "I am still here." My heart stopped. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. I froze, the flashlight slipping from my hand, and then, from the hallway, I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Coming toward me. The journal of the damned. The air in the basement was thick and heavy, like breathing through a wet sponge. Dust motes floated lazily in the faint light of my flashlight, settling on old boxes and forgotten trinkets. I had been avoiding this part of the house since I moved in, but the knocking and the symbols under my bed had pushed me down here. The basement smelled of mildew and something else, something sharp like ozone after a storm. I shuffled through the cobwebs, my sneakers kicking up clouds of dust. In the corner, under a pile of yellowed newspapers, something caught my eye. It was a book, leather-bound and worn, its edges cracked with age. I picked it up, blowing off the dust, and opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting, but not just any handwriting. It was messy, erratic, as if the writer had been in a panic. The ink bled in places, and some words were underlined so hard they tore the paper. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding in my chest. October 12th. The first entry was dated a year ago. The writer talked about hearing noises, faint whispers at first, then the knocking. My breath hitched as I read those words. The same knocking I had heard. The writer had dismissed it as the house settling, just like I had. But as the entries progressed, the tone changed. The writing grew more frantic. The sentences were disjointed. The writer started talking about shadows moving out of the corner of their eye, about doors slamming shut on their own. They mentioned the symbols too, how they had found them etched into the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. They had tried to scrub them away, but they always came back. And then, halfway through the journal, the writer's tone shifted entirely. They stopped talking about the house and started talking about him. "Hay is here," one entry read. "I can feel him. He wants me to let him out. I want. My hands trembled as I turned the page. The next entry was shorter, just 2 sentences. I tried to leave, but the doors won't open. He is in the walls. I flipped to the last page. The final entry was dated exactly 1 year ago. The handwriting was barely legible, the words scribbled in a rush. "He is coming. I can hear the knocking. 3 times. Always 3 times. I have to hide. I have to." The sentence cut off abruptly, the pen scratching across the page in a wild, jagged line. Below it, in fresh ink, someone had scrawled, "I'm still here." The words leaped off the page, making my blood run cold. I slammed the journal shut, my heart racing. But as I did, the flashlight in my hand flickered once, twice, and then went out. The basement was pitch black. I froze, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, deliberate, coming from the stairs. My throat tightened as I whispered, "Who's there?" No one answered. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, right behind me. I could feel a presence, something cold and heavy in the air. Slowly, I turned around, but there was nothing there. Or so I thought. And then I heard it. A low, raspy voice, so soft it might have been my imagination. It said one word, "Mind." I dropped the journal and ran, my feet pounding the creaky stairs as I sprinted back to the main floor. I slammed the basement door shut behind me and leaned against it, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the doorknob. I didn't stop moving until I was back in my bedroom, the door locked, and a chair wedged against it. I sat on the bed, my phone clutched in my hands, but I didn't know who to call. The police? My mom. Who would believe me? As I sat there, the journal's last words echoed in my head. "He is in the walls." I wanted to tell myself it was just a story, the ramblings of some crazy person. But deep down, I knew better. The knocking at 3 a.m., the symbols, the voice in the dark. He was real, and he was still there. The voice in the static. The night had been quiet until then. No knocks, no creaks, no shadows darting in the corners of my vision. I had almost convinced myself it was all in my head, a side effect of moving into a place that felt too big, too empty, too old. But then, at 2:47 a.m., the static started. I wasn't asleep. Insomnia has become my new normal since moving in. I lay there, staring at the ceiling when a low crackle filled the room. It was faint at first, like the distant hum of a TV left on in another house. But it grew louder, sharper, until it sounded like someone was running their nails over a chalkboard in my bedroom. My radio. It was an old thing, sitting on my nightstand, unplugged. I remembered unplugging it. I had no use for it since my phone did everything. But now the speaker seemed to vibrate with the static, spitting out bursts of white noise that made my teeth ache. I sat up, my heart pounding. "What the hell?" I muttered, reaching for the radio to turn it off. But when my fingers brushed the dial, the static stopped. Complete silence. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Then a whisper, low, raspy, and impossibly close. It said my name, Ethan. My blood ran cold. I jerked my hand back as if the radio had burned me. The static returned, louder now, and the whisper came again, clearer this time. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. I threw the covers off and stumbled out of bed, my legs trembling. The voice wasn't just coming from the radio, it seemed to fill the room, echoing off the walls. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers clumsy with fear, and pulled up the flashlight app. The beam of light was weak, but it was enough to see that I was alone. The static stopped again. The silence was worse. I glanced at the mirror hanging on the wall across from my bed. It was an old thing, with a cracked frame and glass that distorted my reflection. But what I saw made my breath hitch. My reflection wasn't moving. Not exactly. When I turned my head, it turned too, just a second too late. It was subtle, but enough to make my stomach twist with dread. I took a step back, my eyes glued to the mirror. My reflection's mouth opened, just a little, as if to say something. But I didn't speak, and neither did it. Not yet. The static roared back to life, so loud it hurt my ears. I clapped my hands over them, but I could still feel the vibrations of the sound in my bones. Then, the whispers. They weren't just saying my name anymore. They were laughing, a low, guttural sound that didn't seem human. It was a sound that made me want to crawl out of my skin. Suddenly, the static cut out again. The room fell silent. The mirror seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone, and then it stilled. I stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. After what felt like an eternity, I worked up the courage to turn on the overhead light. The brightness chased the shadows away, and for a moment, I felt safe. But when I looked at the mirror again, I could have sworn my reflection flickered. Just for a second, just enough to make me question my sanity. I didn't sleep after that. I didn't even try. When the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. My phone lay in front of me, open to a search page filled with articles about haunted houses, electronic interference, and, though I hated to admit it, demonic possession. I didn't believe in any of that. I still didn't, but I couldn't explain what had happened. The radio hadn't been plugged in. There was no one else in the house, and yet I had heard my name. I had seen my reflection move on its own. The coffee was bitter on my tongue as I took a sip. It wasn't helping. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of what I'd read in the journal. The last owner had written about voices, too. Whispers in the night. And the symbols under the bed. I couldn't stop thinking about them. They looked fresh, like they'd been carved yesterday. But the journal was years old. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:05 a.m. The house was quiet now, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way. The knocking would start again tonight, and I had no idea what would happen when it did. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang 4 times before someone answered. "Hey, Ethan, it's, 6 in the morning. Everything okay?" It was my old friend, Matt. We'd fallen out of touch after high school, but he'd always been the guy who believed in ghosts, demons, and every conspiracy theory under the sun. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. "Matt," I said, my voice shaking, "I need your help. Something's going on in this house. I think it's haunted." There was a pause at the other end of the line. Then, very seriously, he said, "Tell me everything." The black magic ritual. The air in the basement was thick, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic, like old blood. I fumbled at the flashlight on my phone, the weak beam of light flickering over the cobweb-covered walls. The journal lay open on the dusty floor, its pages yellowed and torn, but the words were clear enough to send a chill down my spine. "They came here to summon it," I read aloud, my voice echoing in the small space. "A group of them, thinking they could control it, but they didn't understand. You can't control what you don't comprehend." The words were scribbled in a handwriting that grew more erratic with each line, as if the writer had been in a rush or afraid. I turned the page, the paper crackling under my fingers. There was a sketch of a circle, symbols etched around it. They looked like the ones I'd found under my bed. "This house was never just a house," the journal continued. "It was a vessel, a gateway. They thought they could open the door and slam it shut again, but once it's open, it never truly closes. I felt a cold draft sweep past me, though the window was shut. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. The writer had gone into detail about the rituals, how they gathered materials, chants, and sacrifices. The air in the basement seemed to grow colder as I read, the shadows twisting around me. I tried to warn them, the journal said. I told them it wasn't worth the risk, that what they were calling wasn't meant to be summoned, but they wouldn't listen. They never listened. The next page was stained with something dark, the ink smeared as if someone had cried while writing. It came, the words read. It came, and they weren't prepared. They thought they could trap it, bind it, but it laughed. It laughed, and it took them, one by one. Now it's still here, waiting, watching. I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding in my chest. The flashlight on my phone flickered once, twice, and then went out. I was plunged into darkness, the sudden blackness suffocating. I froze, my ears straining to pick up any sound. The house creaked, the floorboards groaning like an old man shifting in his sleep. Then came the knock. Knock, Knock. Knock. Taiju. It was loud, deliberate, and it came from right behind me. I spun around, fumbling for my phone, but the screen remained dark. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed away, my hands trembling. The knocking came again, this time from the wall to my left, then the ceiling, then the floor. It was everywhere, the sound echoing in a way that didn't feel natural. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. I didn't expect an answer, but I had to say something. The knocking stopped. The silence was even worse. I could feel eyes on me, boring into my skin. I turned and ran, the stairs creaking under my feet as I bolted back to the safety of my bedroom. I slammed the door shut, leaning against it as if something might try to push its way through. The knocking started again, this time from the hallway. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Exactly at 3 a.m. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. The words from the journal echoed in my head. If you do, he will come. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound, every creak of the house made me jump. By morning, I was exhausted, my mind racing. I needed to know more. I needed to know what had happened in this house and what was still lingering in the walls. The real estate agent had been oddly tightly-lipped about the house's history. Now I knew why, but I had to uncover the truth. I spent the day researching, digging through old records and talking to neighbors. What I found was disturbing. The house had a history of disappearances, people who'd moved in and then vanished without a trace. The police had never found anything, no signs of struggle or foul play. It was as if they'd been swallowed by the house itself. By nightfall, I was sitting in the living room. The journal opens on the coffee table. The knocking had started again, louder this time, and I could feel it vibrating through the floorboards. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the house settling, but deep down, I knew better. The air in the room shifted, the shadows deepening into something darker, something alive. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, and I knew I was running out of time. Whatever was on the walls, it wasn't leaving, and it wanted me to know that I was next. The thing in the hallway. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if unseen eyes were peering through the cracks in the walls, their gaze cold and unyielding. The air felt heavier, thick with an ominous presence that made each breath a chore. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the old house settling around me. At 3 a.m., the knocking started again, louder this time, reverberating through the walls like an ominous drumbeat. My heart raced as I clutched the blankets tighter, my mind screaming at me to ignore it, to stay in bed. But the knocks grew more insistent, each one echoing through the house with a relentless cadence. Suddenly, I heard breathing. It was soft at first, but it grew louder, more deliberate. It was right outside my door. My blood ran cold as I sat up, my ears straining to pinpoint the sound. The breathing was deep, almost like a growl, sending shivers down my spine. I had to see what it was. With a trembling hand, I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight, my fingers numb and unresponsive. As I approached the door, the breathing stopped. The silence was deafening, more terrifying than any sound could be. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, my mind urging me to step back. But I had to know. Slowly, I turned the knob and pushed the door open, the creak echoing through the hallway. The darkness seemed to swallow me whole. My phone's light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then I saw it, a shadow, tall and impossibly thin, standing at the end of the hall. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence filled the space with an unspeakable horror. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The shadow seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its edges twitching and writhing like living darkness. Then it moved. It didn't walk. It glided, its form shifting as if it were part of the night itself. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath, but my mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. This wasn't just a ghost. It was something ancient, something evil that had been awakened by some dark ritual. As I sat on the bed, the knocking started again, this time more frantic, more urgent. I knew then that I wasn't alone in the house, and whatever was out there wanted me to know it was coming for me. The thought sent a wave of panic through me. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number. It was my best friend, Sarah. She answered on the first ring, her voice sleepy but concerned when she heard my frantic breaths. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately alert. "I need you to come over," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something's in the house." There was a pause, and for a moment I wondered if she believed me. "I'll be right there," she said finally. "Stay on the line." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Hurry," I whispered. As I waited, the knocks grew louder, more insistent. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, a relentless reminder that whatever was out there wasn't going away. The air in the room grew colder, the shadows twisting into grotesque shapes on the walls. Then the breathing started again, right outside my door. My grip on the phone tightened as I heard Sarah's car pull up outside. "I'm here," she said, her voice firm. "Stay inside. I'll come in through the front door." I nodded, though my eyes were fixed on the door. The breathing stopped as I heard Sarah enter the house, her footsteps light but determined. "Jess," she called out, her voice echoing through the hallway. "In here," I shouted back, relief washing over me as I heard her approach. The door creaked as she pushed it open, her flashlight casting a beam of light through the room. "Jess, what's going on?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. I tried to explain, but the words caught in my throat. Before I could speak, a knock echoed through the house, loud and clear. Sarah's eyes widened as she stared at me, her face pale. "What was that?" she whispered. I shook my head, fear gripping me like a vice. "It's been happening every night, and there's something in the hallway." Sarah's grip on her flashlight tightened. "Let me check," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. As she stepped into the hallway, the darkness seemed to swallow her whole. The flashlight's beam wavered and then went out, plunging the hall into darkness. I heard a scream, sharp and terrified, and then silence. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer. I had to move. I pushed open the door, my heart pounding, and stepped into the hallway. The darkness was absolute, but I could feel a presence around me, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to press in on me from all sides. And then I heard the knocking again. It was right in front of me, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I reached out, brushing my hand against something cold and hard. As I stumbled back, my hand knocked against the light switch. The lights flickered on, revealing the hallway in all its eerie glory. But Sarah was gone. In her place was a note, taped on the wall. It read, "I am still here." And then everything went black. The pact that must be completed. The house was quiet that night, but the silence felt heavier than usual. I sat at the kitchen table, the flickering light of a single candle casting long shadows across the walls. The journal lay open in front of me, its yellowed pages filled with the frantic scribbles of the last owner. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages, each word painting a picture of desperation and fear. The journal spoke of an entity, something ancient and malevolent, trapped within the walls of the house. It had been summoned years ago, during a dark ritual performed by a previous owner. The ritual had gone wrong and the entity had been left tethered to the house, unable to escape. But it needed something, someone, to take its place, to become its anchor in the mortal world. And now I was the one who had unknowingly stepped into that role. I tried to push the thought away, but it clung to me like a cold, damp shroud. The knocking had grown louder, the symbols under my bed seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly energy, and the whispers in the radio had grown clearer, more insistent. It was all leading to this moment, to the realization that I was trapped in a pact I had never agreed to. A knock at the door broke the silence. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't the 3 slow knocks I had grown accustomed to. It was a quick, nervous rap. I hesitated, then got up to answer it. It was my best friend, Sarah, standing on the porch with a look of concern etched on her face. She had been calling me nonstop for days, but I had ignored her, unable to explain the strange occurrences in the house. Now, she had shown up unannounced, determined to find out what was wrong. "Hey," she said softly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I've been worried about you. You've been ignoring my calls and your mom said you've been acting weird. What's going on?" I sighed, unsure of how to explain. How could I tell her about the entity, the knocking, the journal? She would think I was crazy, just like everyone else would. But then again, maybe she would believe me. Sarah had always been the rational one, the one who looked for logical explanations. But she had also always been there for me, no matter what. "It's the house," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something's wrong with it. I think it's haunted." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Haunted? You don't believe in ghosts. You've always said it's just people's imaginations running wild." I shook my head. "I know what I said, but this is different. There's something here, something that doesn't want me to leave. It's been trying to communicate with me, to make me, I don't know, to make me do something." Sarah's expression softened and she reached out to place a hand on my arm. "You're scaring me. Let's get out of here, okay? We'll go to your mom's place and we can figure this out together." But it was too late. The knocking started again, louder than before, and this time it wasn't just at the door. It was in the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was everywhere. Sarah's eyes widened in fear as she stepped back, her hand still on my arm. "What is that?" she whispered. I didn't have the chance to answer. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The knocking stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then, a low, guttural voice spoke, echoing through the house. "I'm here," it growled, "and you cannot leave." Sarah gasped, her grip on my arm tightening. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I knew what it was. It was the entity, finally making itself known. And it was coming for us. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing around us like a living thing. I could feel its presence, heavy and oppressive, filling the room. And then I saw it. A shadow, tall and impossibly thin, standing just beyond the edge of the candlelight. "Run," I whispered, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the stairs. But it was too late. The shadow moved, its form shifting and writhing like a living thing. It reached out, its hand elongating, stretching until it was just inches from my face. I could feel its breath, cold and rank as it leaned in closer. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing with a sharp, pulsating pain. The house was quiet again, the only sound the faint creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath me. Sarah was nowhere to be found, and the journal was missing. I stumbled to my feet, my heart racing as I called out for her. But there was no answer. The house was empty, or at least it seemed that way. I knew the truth, though. The entity was still here, watching, waiting. And it had taken Sarah. I staggered through the house, my mind racing with thoughts of what I could do. I had to save her, but I had no idea how. The entity was powerful, and I was just one person, alone, scared. But I couldn't give up. Not now, not when Sarah's life was at stake. I reached the basement, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the light switch. The light flickered on, revealing the symbols carved into the walls. They seemed to pulse with dark, malevolent energy, and I could feel their power calling to me. I knew what I had to do. The journal had mentioned a ritual, a way to banish the entity back to whatever hell it had come from. But I also knew the risks. If I failed, the entity would be free, and I would be trapped in this house forever. But I had no choice. I had to try. I gathered what I could from the journal, piecing together the words and symbols needed for the ritual. My hands trembled as I drew the symbols on the floor, my voice shaking as I recited the words. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing around me, but I kept going, driven by the thought of saving Sarah. And then, just as I finished the final word, the room erupted in a blinding flash of light. I felt a surge of energy, hot and electric, coursing through my veins. The symbols on the floor glowed with an intense white light, and I could feel the entity's presence, angry and powerful, fighting against me. But I held firm, my voice rising as I repeated the words over and over, until the light faded and the energy dissipated. The room was silent once more, and I collapsed to the floor, exhausted. I waited, holding my breath, hoping that it had worked. And then, I heard it. Footsteps, light and quick, coming from the stairs. I looked up, and there was Sarah, standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you okay?" I asked, scrambling to my feet and rushing toward her. She nodded, her voice trembling. "Yeah, I think so. I don't know what happened. One minute I was here, and the next, I don't know. It was like I was somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold." I pulled her into a tight hug, relief washing over me. "It's over," I said. "The entity is gone. We're safe now." But as I held her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The house felt different, the air lighter, but there was still a lingering sense of unease. And then, as we turned to leave, I saw it. A symbol, carved into the wall, fresh and raw. It was the same symbol that had been under my bed, the same symbol that had been in the journal. And beneath it in fresh ink was a single word, mine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The entity was still here, trapped in the walls, waiting. And now it had a new anchor, a new person to take its place. Me. Sarah noticed my expression and followed my gaze. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I knew what it meant. The entity had chosen me, and now I was the one who was trapped. The house had waited for me, and now I was its. And as the realization hit me, the lights went out once more and the knocking started again, louder than ever before. This time, there was no escape. The night of no escape. I sat in the dim glow of my bedroom, my back pressed against the headboard. The house felt alive tonight, its creaks and groans sounding more deliberate than ever. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. I had barricaded my door with a chair, but it felt useless. Whatever was in this house didn't need doors to get to me. The journal lay open on my lap, its pages filled with frantic scribbles. The final entry had changed again, the words "It's your turn" scrawled in red ink that seemed to glisten even in the dim light. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages, the handwriting growing more erratic with each turn. The last owner had written about rituals, about summoning something and failing to contain it. They had tried to warn me, but I hadn't listened. Now it was too late. A loud thud echoed from downstairs, making me jump. My phone, which I had left charging on the nightstand, suddenly buzzed. I hesitated before picking it up, my heart sinking when I saw the caller ID, unknown. I silenced it, but it buzzed again, and again, and again. "Leave me alone," I shouted, hurling the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a crack, the screen flickering before going dark. I buried my face in my hands, trying to calm myself down. But the air felt thick, heavy, and I could swear I heard my name being whispered. Emily, Emily, Emily. The voice was low, raspy, and it seemed to come from all around me. I lowered my hands slowly. The room was quiet now. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. But then, I heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks again. This time, they weren't coming from outside. They were coming from the wall beside my bed. I froze, my eyes fixed on the wall. The knocking stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then, a faint, scratching sound began, like fingernails dragging across wood. My stomach twisted into knots as I threw off the covers and scrambled to the other side of the bed. That was when I saw it. A shadow, tall and impossibly thin, seeping through the cracks in the wall. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat like something alive. The shadow moved, its edges curling and twisting as if it were a living thing. It poured through the wall, filling the room with an icy, unnatural cold. I could see my breath now, puffs of fog in the air. The shadow took shape, forming into something vaguely human. Its presence was suffocating, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was sit there, frozen, as it stepped closer. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The room plunged into darkness, and I was alone with the shadow. I heard its voice then, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate in my bones. "It's your turn," it said. "It's your turn." I screamed again, but my voice was drowned out by the sound of my own heart. The shadow reached out, its formless hand extended toward me. I raised my hands to defend myself, but it was no use. The darkness closed in, wrapping around me like a shroud. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, the room bathed in the faint light of dawn. The chair I had used to barricade the door was still in place. The journal was still clutched in my hand, but something was wrong. The air felt different, lighter, as if the weight of the house had been lifted. I stumbled to my feet, my legs trembling. I pushed open the door, half expecting to find the shadow waiting for me. But the hallway was empty. I moved from room to room, each one quiet and still. The knocking had stopped. The whispers had stopped. The house was silent. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe I survived. But as I reached the front door, I noticed something. The journal was still in my hand, but the final entry had changed again. It now read, "It's your turn." The new owner. The house waited again. Days passed, and the street was quiet, as if the world had forgotten about the small 2-story home with its overgrown backyard. But one morning, a real estate sign appeared on the lawn, swinging gently in the breeze like a grim welcome. "For sale," it read in bold red letters. Below that, in smaller print, a steal. Mrs. Holloway, the same real estate agent who had sold the house to the protagonist, stood outside, her hands trembling as she locked the front door. She glanced over her shoulder as if she expected something to be watching her from the shadows. "It's a good deal," she muttered to herself. "The best deal in town." A week later, a young woman named Emily pulled into the driveway. She was in her early 20s, her hair tied back in a ponytail, her eyes wide with excitement. She had just graduated from college and was looking for a place to start her life. The house was perfect, not too big, not too small, and the price was unbelievably low. "Are you sure about this?" her friend Jenna asked, frowning as she stepped out of the car. "The house looks creepy." "It's just old," Emily said, smiling. "Besides, it's got character. And think about all the money I'll save." Jenna shook her head but followed Emily up the path to the front door. Mrs. Holloway was already there, jangling the keys nervously. "So, you're interested in the house?" she asked, her voice too cheerful. "Yes," Emily said. "It's exactly what I'm looking for. But, can you tell me anything about the previous owners? The last one. Did they leave suddenly or something?" Mrs. Holloway hesitated, glancing at the house as if it might hear her. "Oh, no, nothing like that. Just a family that moved away, you know how it is." Emily raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. Jenna, however, noticed the real estate agent's odd behavior. "Is something wrong with the house?" she asked bluntly. Mrs. Holloway forced a laugh. Oh, nothing. Nothing at all. It's a wonderful home. You'll love it here. As they stepped inside, Emily felt a strange chill run down her spine. The air inside the house felt heavy, as if it had been waiting for her. She shrugged it off, blaming it on the draft from the open door. But as she walked through the empty rooms, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That night, as Emily unpacked her boxes, she found something strange in the basement. It was an old leather-bound journal, tucked away in a corner. She flipped through the pages, frowning at the frantic handwriting. The last entry was dated a year ago, and it read, "Do not answer the knocks. Do not say his name. If you do, he will come." At the bottom, in fresh ink, someone had scrawled, "I am still here." Emily's heart raced. Who wrote this? She whispered to herself. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. It was Jenna. "Hey," Jenna said. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay. That house really gives me the creeps." "I'm fine," Emily said, trying to sound calm. "I just found this weird journal in the basement. It's probably just some crazy person who lived here before. Be careful, okay?" Jenna said. "If anything weird happens, call me." As they hung up, Emily glanced at the journal again. The words seemed to leap off the page, and for a moment, she could swear the letters shifted, rearranging themselves. She blinked, and they were back to normal. "It's just my imagination," she told herself. But as she went to bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. 3 nights passed, and everything seemed normal. But on the 4th night, at exactly 3 a.m., the knocking started. Knock, daughter. Knock. Knock, die. Emily sat up in bed, her heart pounding. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No one answered. She threw off the covers and crept at the door. The hallway was dark, and the knocking grew louder, as if it were coming from the walls themselves. Emily's breath came in short gasps as she stepped into the hallway, and then she saw it. A shadow, tall and thin. It stretched across the wall like a living thing. It moved closer, and Emily froze, her blood cold in her veins. As the shadow loomed over her, she heard a voice, low, raspy, and inhuman. "Emily," it whispered, "it's your turn." She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The shadow reached out, and everything went black. The next morning, Jenna called Emily's phone. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again and again, but there was no answer. Finally, she drove to the house. The front door was open, and the journal lay on the floor, its pages fluttering as if caught in an invisible breeze. The last entry had changed. Now, it read, "It's your turn." Jenna's eyes widened as she read the words. She turned to leave, but as she did, she heard the sound of footsteps. Light, deliberate footsteps coming from upstairs. And then the knocking started again. Knock, why? Knock, godan. Knock, wow. The house waited no more. It had found its new owner.